Hey, listeners, this is Robert. There's a new podcast that fans of the Coen brothers, as well as fans of No Podcast for Old Men, would love. It's a really far-out, groovy new podcast called The Wrath of Pod. The conceit of the show is this. What if the Bible existed only as a big-budget streaming television series? And the two hosts go through each book of the Bible and give their comedic hot takes on the whole thing. What do you think about that, fellas?
I love it. I love it. I wish I'd come up with it myself.
I've listened to a few episodes, and it's brilliant and funny, and it has many things in common with Coen brothers. The Bible, Judaica.
Yeah, very cool.
Let's play the promo and then come back on the other side.
In a world where the Holy Bible is actually a streaming television show with a gigantic special effects budget, two people boldly watch and review every episode. Join these scripture script doctors as they discuss all the on-screen drama and off-screen hijinks of this fictional hit series.
Check that one out, listeners. It's on Spotify, Apple, all your favorite podcasting platforms. Wrath of Pod. Check it out.
You're listening to No Podcast for Old Men.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of No Podcast for Old Men, the only podcast wherein three university philosophy professors provide critical analysis and philosophical analysis of all the Coen brothers films in chronological order. I'm your host, Robert Jones. You can call me Dr. Bob. Today I'm going to go by Bob Jones, and I am joined by my other two co-hosts. Let's see. First of all, in Chico, California, Professor Troy Jollimore. Troy, how you doing today, man?
Doing great. Checking in from Chico, California, Dr. Bob. And so Bob Jones, I'm guessing that maybe you must have some affiliation with Bob Jones University.
I am the founder of Bob Jones. Let me say that again. I am the founder of Bob Jones University. What are you talking? You mean the university that I run out of my living room? Is there another one that I?
I just hope it's the university that I've been writing large checks to every month. That's all I can say.
I like your newsletter.
Yeah, it's a great newsletter. When I was in grad school, a friend of mine, through some weird connections of a student or whatever, he got me letterhead from the actual Bob Jones University.
No, that's awesome. You should write a randomly selected fan of the podcast a letter on that letterhead. That would be amazing.
Or maybe I can get Ethan and Joel Coen to write a letter on that letterhead. Hey, joining us from Louisville, Kentucky, Professor Peter S. Fossil. Peter, how you doing today, man?
Hello, y'all. It's October 31st here. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. We got a good scary movie to talk about for Halloween.
I know, right?
With lots of murder.
Darkness. But yeah, it's beautiful fall here. Yeah. Lots of colored leaves and blue sky and crisp air. It's been very nice.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Just got back from Scotland. And I want to give a shout out to my friend Neil, by the way, in Scotland.
Awesome.
Who's a listener.
Scotland's amazing.
Are the leaves falling in Chico? I'm in L.A. right now. And
you have no seasons, I know.
Yes.
The leaves are definitely falling in Chico. It is definitely fall here. We've had a few days of beautiful fall weather.
Well, today we're going to be covering the 2004 zany comedy remake, The Ladykillers. Hey, but before we jump into that, we have a ton of fan mail, but we should do some shout outs. Troy, why don't you do our first shout out to our fellow podcasters and one of their guests?
Yeah, so we had a wonderful thing happen recently where director Zach Krager was a guest on the Blank Check podcast. Zach Krager, I know. And I mean, so the Blank Check podcast, which is quite popular, has been doing a series on the Coen brothers films just at around the same time we have. And so they were talking about Fargo, and Zach Krager came on because apparently Fargo is one of his favorite films. So that's cool enough in itself. But while he was on the podcast, he name dropped us. He asked the podcast hosts whether they listened to this I'm trying to remember the adjective. It was excellent or something like that. It was a very positive adjective anyway, with which he described this, interesting podcast. And as a result, we got a number of new fans. So I think we owe the Blank Check folks and Zach Krager a big thank you. In fact, we should probably write a blank check to Zach Krager and send it along to him along with some Bob Jones University letterhead.
Yeah, and the hosts, Griffin and David, and I don't remember who it was. One of them, when Zach said, look, I'm calling him Zach, like we're on a first name basis. Hey, Zach, I am in LA if you want to get coffee.
Hey, Zachy, how you doing there, boy?
When Zach said, do you guys know this podcast? One of them said, oh, yes, I heard of that podcast. So
nice. Wow.
Wow,
We are known.
That's nice.
He heard of
Especially because there's a bunch of, Coen Brothers podcasts out there. I catch one every now and then.
There are a few.
I know it's good. Yeah, there's a
shout out.
So this was really nice. And Blank Check, I got to say, I've listened to a few of their episodes since then. They're a lot of fun. Following that episode, they did one on The Big Lebowski with Seth Rogen. That was really fun.
That was funny.
And recently I started listening to the one on The Serious Man with Mark Maron, which is fantastic. So yeah, it's a good pod. They don't need us to plug them, obviously, but nonetheless, if you haven't heard of them for some reason, if you haven't checked them out, go check them out. They're great.
Oh, their listenership is going to skyrocket now.
I hope they're ready. I hope they don't have like a server collapse because of this.
Because we're influencers. I think definitely you guys are influencers.
Oh, yeah. I tell all my students I'm an influencer now. The other day I was in class and I had this brand new chalk. I really like this new chalk I got. It's like a high-end chalk.
Imagine
from
the
Japan.
point of life you've gotten to where you say things like that.
No, hey, I'm enthralled. I want to hear this story, man. Tell me about the chalk, Robert.
Let's hear about the chalk.
Larry, the chalk.
Letting it breathe, so important.
What does it feel like?
Look, this chalk, I got to let you know, it's called Hagoromo chalk from Japan, and it is primo chalk. I mean, this is the Rolls Royce of chalk. And
this is pathetic.
I had a brand new piece of Hagoromo chalk in my hand, and I told my students, I said, this Hagoromo chalk, this was sent to me because I'm an influencer. I'm a teacher influencer. And when you teach and you're an influencer, they send you chalk. And my students believed me. So
I love
as if there's such a thing as a teacher influencer.
You can't be that much of an influencer if you're still using chalk. I mean, it's
hey,
all
chalk's
like
where it's at,
wetboard.
man.
Oh, I love chalk too. But
Robert's old school. I'm telling you.
But I have all these wetboards with the stupid markers, and there were like Mondo pads where you have to draw on a screen.
No, let me say something. When they assigned me this classroom and I walked in, I saw a chalkboard. I was celebrating. I was like, hallelujah. I love the chalkboard. I'm so tired of how long have we been inhaling the toxic chemicals from those markers on the whiteboard?
I know. I like the
right. So, Robert, are you going to write a review of this chalk for like a Chalk Weekly magazine? Because I'm sure that's why they sent you the free chalk.
Yeah. Chalk Weekly. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I thought you used a daily.
It's a great read.
It's a weekly. Oh, okay.
My first favorite magazine is intestineless. What's it called?
Living without intestines.
Living without intestines. That's my.
Yes.
We should mention too. We've gotten some great fan mail. Someone named Hank Bright. I don't know where he's from, but. Great email and really insightful analysis of some of the Coen Brothers stuff. We got the fan mail from L.A. We got it from a place called Huntingdon, Tennessee, Northbrook, Illinois, and even some from the UK, Peter. Petey, the UK, your adopted
homeland.
grounds.
Yeah. Well,
nice.
Huntington's just like south of Kentucky Lake in Tennessee, so it's part of my region too. Yeah.
These emails are great because what they really show is, first of all, people are listening, but really listening and thinking, and people are thinking about Coen Brothers films. And they're the kind of films that get people to think. They're wonderful.
Well, let's start out with our brief opening statement, lightning round, if you will. Let's go to Peter S. Fossil.
Well, before we start, wait, I want to...
Oh, yeah, the acoustics.
The acoustics here.
The acoustics are really good there.
They're good? They're good. Okay. It's like a root sound.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah, good acoustics.
Okay. Those who've seen the film will know what that's. But let me just run through it quickly here. It's a film about the wages of sin being death, about smiting those who worship the golden calves of the world and end up on the garbage island. Even the villain's name is Gold Waith, which is golden meadow, and his door of the gold. So it's this film about the wages of sin being death. It's about what Hume would have called a particular providence, which is kind of God's action in the world in particular individual circumstances rather than the whole world. It's about the role of chance, or my friend Tuque, or Fortuna in life, and the important role that chance plays, and that plays. Of course, Robert has talked a lot about the theme, and we'll get into, I'm sure, we might get to the philosophical themes about freedom and determinism and fate. And it's about the ubiquity of human folly, about the foolishness even of the virtuous as well as the vicious, and the comedic situations that produces. It's about the ambiguities of virtue. And this ties in, I think, with our conversation last time when we had a kind of disagreement where I saw ambiguity, you guys saw moralism. And I think this film carries on with with that theme a bit. But I think the ending here, too, that pushes how goodness itself, it's impossible to escape ambiguities, you might say, in life. I think the Coen brothers are like Dostoevsky that way, really. They're really alive to how even what seems virtuous is somehow tied up with the bad, and the bad is with the good. And it's about the presence of the shadows, of the inescapability of from the darkness. That's a good theme for Halloween, and the inability to use the metaphor they draw of people to read the writing on the wall. I mean, this is the second film where the book of Daniel has appeared. And in the first case, it was Balthasar's father, Nebuchadnezzar, and his turning to Daniel to interpret dreams, just like it was in Barton Fink, and the dreams that film present us with. And here we get Nebuchadnezzar's son, Balthasar, who defiles with a toast of wine, just as they had a toast here, defiles something sacred and has to pay for it, and which brings us back around to the wages of sin being death. So that's my quick 8-point about.
Nice. Wow. Okay.
Oh, did I mention being a man? I think I skipped that one. That's a theme that comes back here from the Big Lebowski.
We don't even have to say that one anymore because that's in every Coen film. Every
kind of
Coen film that somehow comes up, right? Even this one, and I'd forgotten it was in this one, but there it is.
Yeah, there it is, yeah.
Nice. That was great. Dr. Jollimore, what do you got for us? What's your nutshell, lightning round synopsis of the Ladykillers?
In a lightning-struck nutshell, this is a film about 5 evil men who worship a false god, the god of Mammon, men who will do anything to get money, and a good-hearted but somewhat naive woman, a woman who worships a different god, she goes to church regularly to do so, who lets these men into her home, not recognizing their evil nature. So, like Fargo, it's a film about the enemy within. And like Fargo and several other Coen films, it's a film that asks questions about the line between virtue and sin, about the nature of good and evil and their relationship to simplicity, innocence, and sophistication. It's a film about inner and outer, again, the enemy within, but also the inside man who secretly plans to betray you, the inside the body, the internal organs that can also betray you. A film about who gets to be on the inside and who gets left out, about the sacred inner spaces some of us avoid entering, and the guarded sanctuaries that some people are eager to break into. It's a movie about duplicity and hiddenness, fake musicians, hidden tunnels, hidden cigarettes, about concealed intentions and motives, secret plans, the anxiety of being found out, that what you try to hold inside might burst out of you. It's a film about the vulnerability and materiality of the mortal body, how the body betrays us at crucial moments, how darkly comic and undignified it is to be, in the final analysis, nothing more than a sack of trash to be dumped off a bridge onto a garbage scow en route to an underworld that takes the form of an island composed entirely of garbage. It's a silly cartoon comedy with a very dark heart, a film about the possibility, or rather the impossibility, of redemption and the unavailability of grace, and a film, I think, about how silly it is to believe that this world could possibly be a just one. All right, there it is in a nutshell.
Nice. Wow. Okay. Here's my nutshell version. First of all, it's a remake of an Alexander McKendrick 1955 British film from Ealing Studios, which kind of came out with these wacky kind of dark comedies in the 50s, 40s and 50s. So it's a remake, and it is, as you mentioned, Troy, it's a kind of zany, sometimes madcap comedy. It's an American Gothic tale in the guise of a zany comedy, and it's a send-up of Southern gentility. It's a film about masculinity, but I think it's a film about emasculation more than it is about masculinity. Of course, it's a film about greed, avarice, and as you say, the worship, the valorization of earthly goods rather than transcendent goods, where we see, a garbage island, which is a literal island of human waste, and the island as a sort of metaphor for descent into Hades. It's also the second film in a row that features the theme of asses and scatology. It's a scatological. I don't know what the Coen brothers are really into asses so it was a weird thing. And it's also
Robert, that's not just an ass. That's literature.
That's literature. It can pull a bus too. It's also a film about the consequences of stupidity. And lastly, it's a film about race and class in America and the pitfalls of capitalism, which is also another Coen theme. So there you go. There's my little nutshell synopsis of the...
Fantastic. I know we all went into this film not having seen it for a while and worrying we weren't going to be able to get much out of it, but it sounds like we've gotten some stuff out of it and found some stuff in there. So I think we have some things to talk about.
I think
It's
so.
what we do.
It's what we do. We could find something in nothing, as they say.
We'll always find a there, even when there may not be a there. Let me just say before you jump into the summary, Troy, I enjoyed it much more than I anticipated. So it's always
we should talk about just that theme at some point, because I found it unwatchable. I really...
Really? Interesting.
I think I would have walked out if I had been in a theater. But, I always watch these things several times, and it was just a labor to get through the second one. Even though I will say, the more I thought about it, the more things I saw in it. But, oh my God.
My experience was more like Robert's. I expected to really hate it, and I don't think it's great, but it is, for one thing, visually quite a bit more interesting, I think, than Intolerable Cruelty. And there's more going on in it than I had recalled. So not one of their great films, but actually I did like it better. And I thought some of it was very funny.
Well, I'm glad we have something to talk about. This is holding the place of their worst film so far, to me. Anyway.
Oh yeah, and I think it's widely regarded that way. Although I now think Intolerable Cruelty might be a little worse.
I agree.
But yeah,
I kind of go the other way, but I understand.
I mean, if you look at the DVD cover, at least of the version I have, the Coens aren't even mentioned on the cover. It's like they didn't want their names on it.
Something in that. Yeah.
But that said, I agree with Robert.
We can come back to this. Let's come back.
Yeah, we'll come back to this. At this point in the podcast, it is officially time for, drum roll please, the Troy Jollymore summary expert summary of the podcast. Take it away, Troy.
Summarize the plot. The plot: Professor Goldthwaite Higginson Dorr, played by Tom Hanks, a professor of classics, rents a room from Marva Munson, played by Irma P. Hall, an elderly black church lady and widow who, being deeply innocent, perhaps to the point of naivete, has no idea that the professor is in fact the evil leader of a criminal enterprise. He tells her he wants to use her cellar as a rehearsal space for his Renaissance music group while he's on sabbatical. But in fact, the group is a group of scoundrels who are planning to tunnel into the vault of a local casino and steal the money. Mrs. Munson's house happens to be perfectly placed for the operation. The other members of this criminal enterprise are Gawain McSam, Marlon Wayans, who works at the casino and is their inside man; Garth Pancake, played by J.K. Simmons, the excellent character actor J.K. Simmons, a movie effects technician who specializes in explosives; the General, played by Tzi Ma, who rarely speaks but who projects an air of authority and is an expert in hand-to-hand combat; and Lump, Ryan Hurst, a slow-witted ex-football player. The plan proceeds fairly smoothly until Garth accidentally blows off one of his own fingers. Marva Munson, who is out front, hears the blast and is concerned. Professor Dorr tries to cover it up with a lie. Marva's cat Pickles runs off with the finger. Down one finger, Garth nonetheless manages to get the group into the vault, where they help themselves to the money and then retreat, leaving Gawain behind to cover up the hole and remove any sign of the crime, other than, of course, the missing money. But a slight mishap with the explosives meant to collapse the tunnel results in Marva Munson coming down into the cellar and seeing the stolen money. Dor again tries to quell her concerns with some lies, but this time he fails. Desperate to keep her from contacting the local sheriff, Dor tells her the truth, more or less. It's a highly sugar-coated version of the truth in which the crime is portrayed as a victimless one. Insurance will cover the casino's losses, and that loss will be spread among thousands and thousands of policyholders, each of whom will be out no more than 1 penny. Plus, the casino's evil anyway and deserves to be robbed. Marva's almost seduced by the professor's rhetoric, but decides in the end that right is right and stealing is just plain wrong. She demands that Dor's crew return the money and agree to attend church with her the following Sunday. Viewing both demands as equally unthinkable, Dor consults his colleagues. The group quickly comes to the conclusion that they have no choice but to murder the old lady. They draw straws to see who will do it. Coen draws the short straw, but he's unable to carry out the act. Marva Munson reminds him too much of his mother. This leads to a tussle with Garth, in which Coen is shot and killed. As the others are disposing of his body by dumping it off of a bridge onto a passing trash scow, a scow we glimpsed at the beginning of the film and whose passings, accompanied each time by a dumped body or body part, will punctuate the remainder of the film. Garth attempts to take off with all the money, but he is discovered, and both he and his girlfriend, who is in on the scheme, are killed by the general. Their bodies are then also dumped onto the barge. The general draws the next short straw, and he creeps up the stairs and into Marva Munson's room, but as the result of a cartoonish series of accidents, he too ends up dead. After dumping his body off the bridge, Dor and Lump have a confrontation. Lump's moral conscience has finally begun to stir, and he realizes he has no desire to kill an innocent old woman. He threatens Dor with the gun that he was supposed to use to kill her, but of course, being utterly incompetent, he ends up shooting himself. Professor Dor experiences a brief moment of triumph, believing that now he'll get to enjoy all the money himself. But he is then killed when a raven knocks the head off a gargoyle statue and onto him. His body, like Lump's, falls off the bridge and onto the trash scow. In the film's coda, Munson tries to tell the sheriff about the money, all of which is now just sitting on a table in her cellar with no one around. But he assumes that she's just a crazy old lady, and he humors her, telling her to just keep it. She decides that she'll donate it to her favorite charity, the aforementioned Bob Jones University. When she returns home, her cat Pickles runs out the front door. We see that the cat has Garth's finger in its teeth. The cat runs to the bridge, waits for the garbage scow, and drops the finger into the trash as it passes by, completing the disposal of the bodies of the scoundrels and leaving the viewer where we began, as we look up the river to the island of garbage that we glimpsed in the movie's opening scenes. Okay, that's the film.
Again, another tour de force summary by Troy
Boom.
Jollimore. Well, it is time for that monumentally important part of the podcast, and that is the socio-political cultural themes. Peter S. Fossil, what are some of the socio-political cultural themes contained therein?
Well, it's just a few things. First of all, I guess to elaborate a little bit more on why I couldn't stand it, at least, especially at first. I mean, it was the cartoonish projections of race. I'm usually on the other side, like, people get too uptight about all these things. And it was just too much. I felt myself like I'm kind of uncomfortable with this, It was just too much, especially the young black men in the cartoony even way that Marva was portrayed. I just thought, and then when you got to the dying dog, that was not funny. Robert's really, our animal rights and welfare person here, but I just could not go with that joke. It was disgusting to me. So I found a lot of it fell flat, and it was cartoonish and racist, and even then, like, the general with his little Tojo Hitler mustache, and the Lump with his 88 shirt, which is a right wing, 88 is a symbol that the right, ultra right uses for Heil Hitler, because it's the H is the eighth letter in the alphabet. And the sort of Penn State outfits too. I wondered what the illusion was with that. Their football uniforms were very much like Penn State's. At any rate, so let me just start with that I found myself really uncomfortable with the depictions of races, especially, race in this. And then even the southern bit with, Goldwave and Dor. And what is that character? It's this bizarre Beauregard kind of southern antebellum ridiculous fop. And I appreciated actually the mockery of academics in that, of course, because the University of Southern Mississippi would be in Hattiesburg. It's not their flagship, and the pretension of academics was great in there. But that stupid, portrayal of, derisive portrayal of Southern people, I couldn't go with that either. So I found myself really put off by the use of stereotypes here, and it seemed to echo the worst of the Coens that way. Also, even the cartoonishness of a lot of it too. I mean, it's just when I think about the other scenes that bother me in that way, were like the machine gun dance in Miller's Crossing, and sometimes it works. Like in some of the comedies, like Raising Arizona, it can work. But here, the cartoonishness and the shit jokes, the IBS stuff, it was called kind of stupid, I thought. At any rate, so I was not, but let me speak more generally. Okay, so this is coming out in 2004, which is the middle of the Iraq War, and it contrasts, of course, with 1955, which would have been, the Cold War when the British film comes out. And that's another thing, by the way, too, is you can see this shift. The 1955 Ladykillers, I think is very much about Englishness. And about the little old lady who, everybody's so polite with the little old lady, and they're deferential. And there's a feminist theme here with the authority of older women, in our lives, and that comes out. But there's something charming about the 1955 depiction of the little old English lady and everybody's deference to her here. One of the things I thought was interesting was this shift from 1955 till 2004, in the sense that 1955, when the original comes out, is the heart of the King-level civil rights movement, the post-war civil rights movement, and you're just coming on the heels of Montgomery and the movements down there, Birmingham, and here you've got that interesting contrast between Gawain and Ms. Munson, and also Garth Pancake. Garth Pancake tries to connect with Gawain, having been on the Freedom Rides, and he wears that with a badge of pride. And he thinks that establishes some kind of cred he should be able to trade on with young black guys. And you find out the guy's like, "I don't even vote, you asshole." And I found the cynicism that troubling, but it also did mark a kind of social commentary on the shift from the more pious and beloved community of the 1955 movement to what's depicted in the film of these dissipated young black men who are, pursuing lives of crime and triviality. And I thought that was an interesting observation. On class, what you see is, I think there's a really interesting argument that Goldthwait makes with, which does echo to some extent, the 55 version, but the argument about insurance companies, and that the real evil here is the casino, and the casino identifies itself as criminal. It's the Red Bandit or something, the Bandit Queen. It's the band, it's a bandit, and it wears it on its sleeve, and it's skimming money off of a relatively poor population. Along, casinos generally, gambling generally is a kind of skim off the poor and the mathematically challenged, let's say. And, the idea that there are the real villains here, and that, robbing from, in the left, they used to call it a proletarian appropriation, except not all of these people are really proletarians, but, stealing from that kind of corporate thief or capitalist thief, it may have some virtue to it. So I thought that was an interesting commentary that's being made of criminals stealing from other criminals, and the sucking in of almost of Marva. Let's just say the place of the strong black woman in black culture and in just American moral life generally, you might say, is interesting in this context too. So those are some of the basic political themes I see in the film.
Hey, Petey, I wanted to say, thinking back to "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" I remember before our recording that day, I thought Peter is going to just not be into this depiction of the South. And then when you were okay with that, I literally was watching this thinking, wow, this is troublesome, but Peter's going to be okay with it because he was okay with that other movie.
I was surprised
all
myself.
Of a sudden, you're...
This is why we call Petey the wild card. We never know what's going to come out.
The blinkers came off as well.
What did they say? He got blue pilled or something?
It was too much. Sometimes.
I just want to something you mentioned. I'm bringing it up just in response to what you were saying about the depiction, the racial depiction that the Coens do. Again, the Coen brothers cannot depict Asians.
Oh, I know it.
Where they go into the donut hut the woman doesn't even speak English, and the guy comes out and he's like some like ex-Vietnamese, North Vietnamese
Hitler figure.
Anyway, I just like, what is with the Coen brothers and their anti-Asian shit?
Yeah.
Why don't they create a film where the Asian character is, quote, American? I mean, here's something that's interesting. I've looked at various studies, and the average, quote, the average like white American, when you think about who is American, Asians are the group that is most considered not American. When I saw that scene, I was like, holy shit, again but Troy, please jump in response to PD, and also if you want to take it with your socio-political, cultural stuff.
Yeah, I maybe have a couple things. I mean, these are really interesting issues, and I wonder, and I'm really sort of speculating here, because you're right about the Coens with Asian characters. They've never done a good job with it. They are always, even though they can really give some great performances, like, Stephen Park in both Fargo and Serious Man, small roles, but really great. But they just don't do a good job depicting them. I'm surprised by that bit that you cited, and I wasn't aware of that Asians are generally regarded as sort of the least American, quote unquote, whatever that means. I wouldn't have thought so, and I wonder if my perspective is partly skewed by largely, well, first of all, being on the West Coast, but secondly, also being in academia, where I think there's a lot of Asian students, certainly in Californian universities, but I think a lot of other universities as well. So that it strikes me as weird to think of Asian Americans as not being American in some way or something like that. And I'm wondering if the Coens have also, being from academic family and so on, been somewhat influenced by that. Because I think there's something actually, I'll get to it later, about there's interesting racial stuff going on.
There's also the bit, they always draw from, the noir films, and Asians come off badly. Think of Chinatown.
Oh, yeah. So they're working from traditions in which this is traditional. And, sometimes they try to correct those traditions a little, but they can't and don't want to very much, because they're working with the traditions and they're trying to do something with them. So,
I mean,
yeah,
sometimes
really
I feel
tough.
like when I watch the Coens, I'm like, we haven't come that far from, was it Breakfast at Tiffany's with Mickey Rooney?
Mickey Rooney. Oh, boy.
Here's the difference. They have someone who's actually Asian playing the role. Other than that,
that's a good thing. It's a step in the right direction. No, he's clearly a comic. But of course, all of these are caricatures. I mean, I think part of the problems that the Coens face, and I don't want to whitewash or let them off the hook. I think they have an issue here for sure, and it's especially visible in this film. I do think that part of the problem that they've sort of put themselves in with their style of filmmaking is that basically all of their characters, no matter who they are caricatured in some way, right? Even the ones we love, right? Even Marge in Fargo or the dude, they're still sort of caricatures, and it takes us a little while to realize, oh no, these are full human beings who at first we're laughing at because they talk funny or walk funny or whatever. And then we get to know them as full human beings. But if they caricature everybody, well, when they caricature white people or whatever, that's okay, right? It's okay to caricature white people. We can take it. We're in a position of power and security or whatever. When you caricature minorities, it often feels weird, right? It's hard to do. And after the Ladykillers, of course, as largely before, in large part, they just shy away from including minority characters in their films. And on the one hand, not good because there's no representation. On the other hand, I can sort of see why. Because, of course, by this point, I think they're realizing, hey, we don't know how to do this. We don't know how to include visible minority characters in our films without having it feel icky because we caricature them. Because, again, we caricature everybody. But it doesn't feel that way when you do white people. So they're in a really, even when they portray Jewish characters, they get accused of caricaturing them and portraying them in a negative light, et cetera. They're in a very tricky situation in that way. I'm not going to say they've dealt with it as good as you possibly could. I do want to recognize, I think, the complexity of the situation that they're in because of that.
I think the Coen brothers are smart enough to write really solid, quote, minority characters without doing any kind of a depiction that uses tropes and stereotypes, even if they're doing satire. So, because there's plenty of movies that do satire the Coens do this. They magnify all the stereotypes, and then they bring them out, and then they're like, but look, we're equal opportunity satirists. But this is delicate territory, and I think doing it a few times, but it's starting to become something where I'm thinking, what the hell are they doing,
I agree it's delicate territory, and I think that's part of why I understand their skittishness about even including such things in their films after this. But at the same time, I want to concede to you, yeah, I wish they hadn't decided to handle it in just through an avoidance strategy. I do wish they had tried. I would like to see them do, if they come back together and work together again, I'd like to see them try. Because I agree with you, they're smart, they can figure it out. But it is going to be tough for them, because as far as the tropes go, like, all their characters are tropey. Tropes are sort of their basic building blocks of their films. So, but still, I do want to see them try.
Yeah, I mean, there's this issue of the artfulness or lack of artfulness in the way of dealing with these stereotypes and tropes, and the coy way they play with them, and the winks and the nudges and the ironies. Gawain and the two who try to hold up the donut shop, they hardly look like Miss Munson's complaining about the youth too. So there just seems to be this criticism about young blacks and how they've emerged out of the Black freedom movement, or failed to emerge out of it in promising ways. And I thought, like, well, that's a bold thing to do, but it's also kind of dark and risky. You see virtue in Marvin Munson. I don't see any virtue in the young black men that are shown there. Maybe, what's his name? Weemack. I mean, maybe. In the guard there, maybe. But they all kind of seem ridiculous, people. It's Other and, Marva that are the sources of virtue there, and the church to some extent. And I thought it was a dark commentary on young black men, at any rate. Or what do you think? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm all wet about that.
In response to your question, I think that Maxam is sort of the product of, or the victim of, what's left in the wake of the white liberal solution to the civil rights movement. And so the idea that all you need to do is recognize black people as equals, and then that will solve the problems, as opposed to solving the structural economic class antecedents and foundations of the problems, which, of course, the antecedents do go back to slavery. But what I see, Gawain and Weemack are, in some ways, the results of the kind of policies that Garth. The truth comes out to me when Garth says something like, well, with equal rights comes equal responsibilities. You got to accept the responsibilities, right? And so this is a commentary on this kind of white...
It's when they're drawing straws, yeah.
This white liberal kind of posturing, or it's a kind of performative anti-racism. And so, look, now you're equal, but then there's this hidden, sublimated, now that we've accepted you, now you need to step up. And what I want to say is the ravages of slavery and racism and Jim Crow, that's what is left in the wake of that kind of solution. When Gawain says, I don't even vote, right? And I don't even, the Freedom Riders, when are they getting the hell out of here? I know that on the one hand, as you point out, that seems like, wow, that's a harsh way to portray that character. But I think it's actually, it makes a commentary about the kind of solutions that white corporate liberal have towards solving these kind of problems. So anyway, that's the way I saw it.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. I think there are people like that. And surely it's got to be okay to show people like that in movies. I think that if we said to the Coen brothers, but, is that how you're representing young black Americans? They're going to say, look, not all young black Americans are the same. We're not trying to provide a representative account of young black people in this country. There's not a lot of virtue in Gawain. There's not a lot of virtue in any of the characters we're showing outside of Marva Munson. My hesitations in terms of racial depiction actually center on the depiction of Marva Munson, but we can come back to that. That's the only place where I feel a little uncomfortable in this film. But I think that they're not trying to show anybody in a positive light or a representational light or anything like that. I actually think of the various conspirators, Gawain is in a lot of ways the most sympathetic, because he does have doubts. He can't kill her. He goes up to shoot her and he stops because he does have kind of a conscience. Lump is struck by conscience very close to the end as well, and we can come back to that. But in his case, it's completely ineffective. He's so incompetent, he just shoots himself. Gawain, has an attack of conscience. Gawain is also in this very interesting way, and I alluded to this earlier on when I talked about inside and outside, and Gawain being the inside man, which also makes him kind of an outsider in this group. And there's many moments where we sense that he's the outsider, obviously in the tension between him and Garth, for instance. And there's a very telling moment, I think, when after the heist, they're all gathered back in the root cellar, except for him, because he has to stay behind and cover it up. So he is the servant, in a sense. He's doing their dirty work, cleaning up after them. While meanwhile, all the white people, and I'm sort of counting the general as white, by the way, along the lines of what I said earlier, because he sort of gets to count in here too, ironically. That's part of why I don't feel like they regard him as an outsider in a weird way. All the insiders are gathered and they have a little toast. They get out the champagne and they're celebrating, and Dorr makes his wonderful speech and so on. And we marry few, blah, blah, blah. We've done this noble thing, blah, blah. Gawain's not even there. They don't even wait for him to be part of it. They don't care about him. He, as the inside man, has made himself outside. He gets excluded. And obviously, in a sense, because he's a traitor, you can't trust him because he's betraying his employer and so on. But obviously, I think the fact that he's black also has something to do with it. So I think there's this very interesting thing in terms of a racial commentary going on with the way Gawain gets treated by the other people in this conspiracy. The fact that he's the first to get killed, of course. And Robert, you mentioned Garth's line, which I think is such a wonderful line. It's possibly my favorite line in the whole movie, when they're trying to get him to go and kill this woman. Actually, there's two great lines there, right? One of them is the one you mentioned, with equal rights comes equal responsibilities, which is so great in that context, for a white guy to draw on that sort of rhetoric in trying to get a young black person to go and kill another black person. I think that's incredible. That's an amazing comic line, and a very, very darkly comic line.
I really appreciate the contortions that you're both going through.
These are not contortions, Peter.
I mean, like the idea that, there really are black people out there. Like, that's like saying, like, oh, well, there are these stereotypes out there, and this is just a sociological portrayal. It has nothing to do, no connection at all with the history of stereotypes and the history of the way black males have been portrayed in art. I mean, it's not really a plausible account. And as far as his not killing Marfa,
are we going to get to a point where we can't show a black criminal
doesn't
in a
kill
movie
Marfa because he's still a man-child. He can't grow up and be an adult. He's still like a little child in the face where there's not much virtue in all that.
I'm not claiming there's much virtue. I'm saying he's less bad than the rest. He's a little more sympathetic than the other. I still think he's a terrible person. They all are.
I mean, Robert, I agree with you. Like, but it's. They've given us more meat about like the failure of liberal politics and all that, but just the refusal to vote about it. I don't know. I think you're really pushing it there. Although I will agree, because that Garth Pancake's attitude is there's something really
odious.
Wrong. It's something odious about it,
Yeah.
or I say patronizing about it, frankly, and the belief that he's owed some kind of privilege because he had been in. I mean, he should be seen as heroic if he was genuinely a freedom rider. But the way he plays that card in that context shows you really how shallow it is for him.
The manipulative way. I mean, in every confrontation between the two, I find myself taking Gawain's side and thinking, well, Garth is just a jerk. And the other thing he says here at about the same time, very similar line. He says, "Wait a minute, you've got to accept your responsibilities, young man, and shoot that old lady." That line is gold. That's great.
Well, it's golden. It's golden. Yeah.
But no,
I don't vote is a pretty nasty depiction too.
But a lot of people don't vote, Pete. Are we not going to show people who don't vote in movies?
Oh yeah, it's sociological realism. I see.
No, let me jump in and say, feeling utterly alienated and feeling total disaffection from the process, the voting process, is actually a very natural thing to feel. In fact, there was a recent study from, I think it was out of Yale. It basically showed the only people's interests who are carried out by the government are the plutocrats. So actually voting doesn't really, you have
it was
very
a Princeton
little
study.
democracy. Princeton study. And just as an aside, he was the victim of child abuse. So we do get a glimpse into his childhood, which is horrible, right? And the way the mother treats him and what she says to him, and he's saying, "I love you." It's heartbreaking. So that's one aspect of it. But secondly, to me, it's totally understandable why a disaffected young black guy like that voting wouldn't even cross his mind. I'm not saying that black people don't vote. I'm not saying young black people don't vote. I'm not saying that they shouldn't vote. What I'm saying is, for that kind of person in that demographic, not voting seems like it makes a lot of sense.
Hey, I agree with you. I don't always vote. I think a good, strong argument to be made is for an anarchist not voting kind of thing. But you still got to portray something virtuous and noble that's going on there, even on a political level, and not just an utter washout, an utter ne'er-do-well that he's become. And I think that they missed a beat there. They could have given something else, but or even with another character outside of the gang of criminals. But yeah, it was weak to me.
Well, Troy, you should probably continue with your.
I think most of what I've said actually has come up. So I do, maybe I could mention, but I think in a way this goes more into philosophical themes or whatever. But I did feel a little weird about the depiction of Marva Munson, who it feels sometimes the attitude towards her is a little condescending. And in my mind, I couldn't help but compare her with Marge because, despite the obvious surface dissimilarities, there are a lot of parallels between these two films. They're both sort of movies about criminals and about the aftermath of crime and so on. And in particular, I think that Marva Munson and Marge are parallel characters in certain ways, in the sense that both of them are inherently good people in some way. They're faced with evil characters. They don't know how to make sense of them. They are kind of stumped by this in some sense. But Marva doesn't even realize she's stumped, right? She just has no clue that there's even an issue here in a way. Whereas Marge is smart enough to realize eventually that she's stumped. And Marge starts to get past it and think her way through. And there's the confrontation with Grimsrud at the end. And Marge ends the film disturbed and wondering what's really going on. And none of that psychological complexity happens with Marva. She just sails through in an oblivious cloud through the entire film and ends up exactly where she began. There's no sign of any sort of deep thought or progress or any attempt to really come to grips with what's going on. And so I don't end up admiring her. There's some sense in which she is presented as virtuous, obviously, and she thinks of herself as virtuous. But of course, Garth Pancake thinks of himself as virtuous. He was a freedom rider. And even Professor Dorr has his justifications for what he does. Thinking of yourself as virtuous in this film is clearly no guarantee that you are. I feel like really in some deep way they're critiquing Marva Munson. And I'm okay with them critiquing people. They do it all the time. But in this case, because she is portrayed as so sort of simplistic in this way, and again, because she is, the main black character in the film and so on, it felt a little mean to me. And it felt, I guess what I felt like in a way is they are very, very interested in Marge Gunderson. They're extremely curious about her, and they really want to develop her as a full person. And in the case of Marva Munson, they're not. They're not really interested in her as a person. They don't really fully imagine her. I mean, she has a lot of screen time. And if you think about the Coens and the stuff they've done with characters who had like 30 seconds of screen time in some cases, or a couple minutes of screen time, and they've created indelible characters that we still think of. Marva Munson here, Irma P. Hall, gets a lot more screen time than that, but she doesn't get developed at all. She doesn't turn into a full human. So that's the place where the film did, despite my liking it better than I expected to and enjoying a lot about it and so on, it did leave a bad taste in my mouth, the way that they treated that character.
Yeah, I agree with you about that. I'd kind of add that one theme I thought about saying that the film is about is ignorance and virtue. And there, you could say, I think she's a bit more ambiguous in the sense. I think they've got this, the sort of. It reminded me of the Dostoevsky's Idiot, really, in Prince Mishkin, in a way that, a good person in a bad world, and what does that look like? And she is good. She's like common people good. But, when you start talking like about the goodness of the folk, you've already established a kind of patronizing, point of view. And I saw that in her. On the other hand, I do think she comes off as she refuses the, the invitation to join in the conspiracy. And she's, clearly loved her husband, and she's, a lot of friends. She's got a lot of virtue to speak of. But then they throw in this thing about Bob Jones, it's my God, it's the way that ignorance can lead you, well-intentioned people into, bad practices. You could argue that because there's so much providential coincidences happen that even though she's going to give the money to Bob Jones, something positive will come out of it. But it doesn't look good for her, that she's so easily taken in. But, if she were giving it to Howard or some or the NAACP or some, her own church. Why doesn't she give it their own church? But Bob Jones, for Jesus Christ, really.
Let me maybe very quickly comment on one thing Peter said, and then I'll let it go for now. We'll come back to it. And that's, Peter, you mentioned being a good person. What was it, a good person in a bad world or something like that? I think the problem with the depiction of Marva is that she's I don't want to say whether she's good or bad, but she's a person in a good world. Like the world itself in this film, this film is like the Hudsucker Proxy. It's like, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's a fable. It's an unreal world.
Raising Arizona.
I read Raising Arizona as being more ambiguous because in the end, again, it ends with a dream, not with any actual reality. So we don't know how things are going to work out. But Hudsucker and Oh Brother, and well, again, I read Hudsucker ambiguously too, but we don't need to go back to that. But on the surface, at least, those films have happy endings. You're right that in a sense, Raising Arizona on the surface does too. We have to kind of ignore that's a dream. These are all films that sort of take place in this just universe where in the end, all the wrongs are righted and all the people get what they deserve and so on. And that's what sets this apart from Fargo in a way, because, of course, the world of Fargo is not just at all. Even though the evildoers are punished, many innocent people are punished, too. There's a real cost to that. And that doesn't happen here, right? In this universe, there's no innocent victims. No one's harmed except the people who are bad and they bring it on themselves. In some cases, literally, they shoot themselves and so on, or they're killed by their own gun, right? And so Marva lives in this universe, essentially, and believes in it because of what she hears in her church, where everything's going to be okay. And you don't really have to be good. You certainly don't have to be smart, because God's going to take care of everything and mete out punishments and rewards and make sure everybody gets what they want. And so she doesn't have to develop any sort of virtuous intelligence, phronesis, right, or anything like that. She can just muddle her way through, and as long as she has good intentions, it's guaranteed to work out. Now, there's a meta level reading of this on which, and I like this reading, but you really have to read a lot into it, on which the Coens are critiquing that very idea, right? The movie is so silly, again, it's cartoonish, we can't believe in it, that by presenting a just world in such silly, cartoonish terms, they're teaching us that it is silly and immature to believe in a just world. And ultimately, I think maybe that really might be what they're up to. But I don't, even if that's right, and that's probably the reading of the film I do prefer, I don't like the way they use Marva as part of that, because it does end up using her, treating her in this kind of condescending way that doesn't feel good to me.
Yeah. And you don't see that in Wilberforce either in the original, I don't think. Maybe a little bit, but not really. Yeah.
I want to go back to the issue of Gawain and this race and class thing. The first thing is there's a line that the amazing Stephen Root is in this one again. And I think he plays Mr. Gudge or Gudge, I think is the one.
Gudge, yeah.
He's the manager of the Bandit Queen. And so when Gawain is confronting him about losing his job, we discover that every menial job at the casino, he says, there'll be a black man, you're black, and the next person will be black. Every menial job is filled by a black man, right? And so this says something about this racial and economic underclass that's entrenched in Mississippi. He doesn't even see it. And, which is, it's this kind of critique of white liberal guilt. This is what I was getting at with Garth, right? So who's the freedom rider? Garth. Who kills the black man? Garth. Garth is the one who kills the black man. So he's waving his liberal bona fides. I came down with the freedom riders, but it's that kind of white liberal solutions that lead to this permanent underclass. I mean, Gawain is.
But do you really want to come down on the freedom riders, Robert?
I'm not.
No, he's coming down on this particular freedom rider, not on all of them.
Garth is appropriating as a flag of virtue his association with the freedom riders, and he turns around and says, "With equal rights comes equal responsibilities." Right.
I think there is a suggestion he's not even wasn't one of them, because as I recall, he's got the date slightly off.
He's got the date off. It's 1961. Yeah. He says it's 1960.
Yeah, he says 64 is 61. So it makes you wonder, is this guy even really?
But what I want to say is when Gawain says, I don't even vote, what I'm seeing it is as, to clarify, it's a kind of disdain for the whole white liberal world, the solution. And he is disenfranchised. And this is what I was trying to say is, as a young black man, he feels totally, and for good reason, utterly disenfranchised, given the kind of entrenched racial and underclass that he's a part of in Mississippi at this time. And that's one more thing. I'm not sure exactly when the film takes place, but she says 30 years after Dr. King. So is the film taking place in 1998, or is she?
It's ambiguous, isn't it? And then she's like the age of Montel, which is also, again, there was a kind of cynicism and all that just really turned me off. But yeah.
So my point is that there's this commentary on white liberal and white liberal guilt, and I think Garth really personifies, and this is in Ralph Ellison we see this in not Black Boy, but Invisible Man. We see this kind of the white hero, right? The white hero is going to come and save the black person or the underclass, but really it's within the structures of the hierarchy. So it's not a revolutionary way to approach solving racism. It's a liberal way, which I think this is partially a critique of. And, the fact that Marva, she starts out the film saying, he left his wallet in El Segundo, which is actually a great song. I love that tune. But this is a commentary as well on the lack of agency of young black men, right? African Americans in general. And so I want to go on record as saying Coens are presenting a lot of tropes, and, the kind of step and fetch it blacks we see, the guy who's eating too much and the security guard. There's a lot of things that make me uncomfortable, but I do think there's a way to read Gawain as part of the disenfranchised underclass, and especially in Mississippi, the system is stacked against him, and his childhood is stacked against him. It's so heartbreaking. I mean, that's a scene for me when that little kid says, "Mom, I love you," and she slaps him. Holy shit, that's really hard to see.
That's possibly the darkest point in the film, and I found it made me very uncomfortable. I think it was a good kind of discomfort. I had to think about how to feel about it and reflect on my feelings afterwards, but I ended up really sort of admiring the filmmakers for being willing to go somewhere that dark in a sequence that is largely comic, but of course about very dark things. This guy's going to kill this innocent woman, and then they go into this very traumatic childhood memory that informs his behavior. And I really, it's a bold move, and I certainly understand if people don't like it. I had totally forgotten that it was in there. The other thing I want to briefly interject, back to your point about the workers at the casino and how all of the not so great jobs are being done by black people. As far as we can tell, I think from this film, the casino is basically the only industry in this town. We don't see any other sort of employer. The street, the sort of main street that they walk down sometimes has no open businesses on it. It looks like basically the alternatives for people living in this town are basically the casino or church. Like those are the only two institutions, that seem to be the poles of this town. And then, of course, you have these cops in this town, the sheriff and his deputy or whatever is, who do nothing as if there's no crime, when in fact, Robert, as you kind of said earlier, well, there is crime. The casino is constantly committing crime. The casino, the only industry which produces nothing, which only redistributes wealth, mostly from the poor to the already wealthy, is essentially oppressing and exploiting and committing crime all the time. But of course, the police aren't going to do anything about that. That's a legally permitted business. So they just sit around doing nothing and making like everything's okay and there's no crime at all. And I actually think, there's a very sort of bitter criticism and critique of contemporary social, of society going on there.
I mean, if I can just extend your critique, because, of course, I disagree with you. I mean, I just see this as a couple of racist and cynical white directors who overstepped in their pursuit of wacky comedy. But it also applies to the class struggle here, because, I do think there really is an interesting argument to be made about, like, hey, this is you could have a proletarian appropriation of money from this casino, and maybe it is justified by the disenfranchised and the marginalized and the those who've been exploited and who are being exploited still in that casino. The only drawback to that, and it's a similar thing about the racial thing, dimension, is that there's not a bit of class consciousness, except in maybe Goldthwait and but it's insincere there. But if they were motivated by class, a sense of class struggle and class war, would be one thing. But still, but there still is that. I mean, there still is. These are workers. At least in Gawain's case, these are workers stealing from people who are stealing from them. And there's maybe something virtuous about that.
And can I add just a quick observation? I don't agree with you. There's not a bit of class consciousness. I do think this is a very silly movie. It's first and foremost a comedy. It's not intended to be a critique, and that's not its main business. But I think it's there. There's this very interesting moment.
In Gawain's mind, yeah. Like, he's not doing it for the sake of class struggle. But,
Oh, no, that's right. No, he's not conscious. That's right. But, there's moments where you kind of sense he sort of is when he responds to Garth's insults and so on. But there's this very interesting moment, I think, and it goes back to I talked earlier about how they commit the heist. They all come back except for him. He's left in the vault. They're raising a glass. Dora's making a speech. The speech is sort of cobbled together from a bunch of different sources. He's quoting from this and that. There's a little Shakespeare and so on. Then there's also a little bit of Marx. Right, there's a bit where he begins, from each according to his ability.
Right, from each
finish it, right? Ability and so on and so forth. He doesn't finish it. But at that moment, it's at the end of that line, they flash back to Gawain. And Gawain's in the vault, and it's not just that we see him at that moment. That's already interesting. But what he's doing is he's building a wall, right? He's building a wall between him and the other characters. And we see him put the last brick in that wall, just as Dora is quoting Marx. I think that's fascinating.
It's a great scene. I agree with you.
I hadn't remembered the movie containing anything that good. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, okay, that's really metaphorically layered in a way that is very satisfying, I think.
Yeah, I mean, plus Galway, Dora had talked about immuring the old woman, and he does later, actually comes after that. Yes. But, he's immuring them in a way. And it's in that, I really like your analysis about the sort of liminal spaces, the underground spaces. These boxes are both underground, the basement and the money room, and their access to it happens through a tunnel underground. They've moved into this outside of the upper world and into a subconscious, subterranean, moral, universe. But he's walled them in there, and then he's leaving there.
Yeah, that's right. And they're getting Gawain to build his own wall that will seal him in this vault, essentially. I mean, he will leave.
That's right.
He's not literally sealed in, but metaphorically, I think.
Well, but
he's building his own prison.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the writing on the wall, right? That is part of the story that they allude to from Daniel. And it's a man's finger that appears, just like Pancake's finger, blown off finger.
Oh, that's nice. I love that.
I know. And then the toast. I mean, what's his name? Balthazar, gives it toast, an inappropriate toast, and so does Galway. So they're like reenacting that scene from Daniel. I wonder what their fascination with Daniel is. It's so interesting. Anyway. Great scene. I
want to touch back on the disenfranchisement of Gawain and that underclass. That's what I was talking about. I know that, Peter, you have contempt for the portrayal, but let me take one more crack at it. So Marva is a part of a system. She buys into a system. In fact, she literally pays into a system that is dedicated to oppressing her. Her religion is the master's religion. Her contributions to Bob Jones University. These are the institutions that oppress her, and she's embraced them. Not only that, she's also embraced patriarchy. Her husband's painting, what's his name again? Othar. So he's the patriarch of he's been dead for 20 years. He's the patriarch. He's her moral compass. It's only when she looks up at the painting that she goes, I can't do this, right? She's getting sucked in by Dora. So here's where I want to say kudos to Gawain. Gawain is saying, fuck you, fuck the system. It might work for you. It hasn't worked for me. Look what I'm doing. I'm a pretty smart guy, and look what I'm doing. I'm being told, because if you remember, there's that scene when we first meet him in the casino, where Weemax says, yeah, you can dig through the shit. There's Tux wipes and reference to hemorrhoids again. But if you dig through that, you might find the dollar chip. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I actually respect Gawain for not voting and saying, fuck you. Whereas Marva is a part of the class that we see. We see the gospel. We see the friends come over. And there's a sense in which they've all bought into the structure. Notice she talks about Dr. King, who was a reverend. I think Gawain is, if he followed anyone, it would be more of a Malcolm X kind of a thing. So I want to defend Gawain and say his behavior, I agree that he's a trope by the Coen brothers, but his behavior as a character in the film is totally understandable as a fuck you. So that works for me.
I think Malcolm X would start slapping Gawain and never stop. If he had a chance.
And let me say one more thing that ties into the slapping, which is the slapping,
The
which
smiting.
is mentioned. The smiting, of course, is mentioned. We see that sometimes you got to slap them upside the head, and so we have Gawain once again, and this is now at the hands of another African American, another black person, but again, it's the black person who has embraced the white solution. It's the religion and the sort of the place that you hold in the white structure. And then Garth, the supposed freedom rider, who ends up shooting him. So and then his mother is also slapping him and when he's a child. So my point is, I think Gawain's black rage is righteous, and I think that it kind of works for me on that level.
Can we also mention how Gawain loses his job, which he then has to get back in order to carry out this plot? He loses his job for stepping out of place and relating to one of the casino customers as a human being because he's attracted to her and he flirts with her. And yeah, I know he's pretty heavy-handed in it. I'm not saying it's appropriate, but I think that on a metaphorical level, it's pretty interesting that this job demands that these people, Robert, you mentioned emasculation somewhat earlier on. In a sense, the job demands that they emasculate themselves, that they suppress and keep inside all this human stuff. And if they dare to let it out too much and suddenly become full human beings, they get fired and they get replaced by somebody else.
Well, I think part of the emasculation theme is all of those guys are, first of all, Dorr he's erudite and he's into antiquity, but he's definitely not very masculine. He's got this weird, the thing that gives it away is that weird laugh that he has. It's
I know, right?
I do think that that's weird. So that seems, he's emasculated.
I mean, they're drawing from Alec Guinness, right? You know,
Partly. But yeah, I think that laugh is amazing, I got to say.
I think, so let's go to Garth. Garth is, and some of the things I've read, which I think is interesting, is I read this essay. I want to say this guy's name because I got to give this guy credit. He's really, David Arnold. There's this English guy in like Wisconsin who wrote an essay. It was really interesting. He made an observation. He said that Garth, he's kind of like this military hyper masculine, but his dress, he said the way he looks, he's coded as gay, right? And he says his girlfriend, the shorts and the mustache, and right and it's
the little shirt, Hawaiian shirt, sort of.
And his girlfriend is coded as lesbian. I mean, she's pretty, she looks like him except she has pigtails. And so I think what's interesting is, so we have the emasculation of Garth, and he's metaphorically emasculated because he loses his quote finger. But of course, Gawain immediately says, he brings up Lorraine Bobbitt, the one who chopped off the
right.
So there's the emasculation, the finger as representing his penis, and then
I mean, Pancake says to Gawain that it's to be. He associates being a man with killing. Because be a man and go kill that old lady kind of thing.
Excellent.
And Mrs. Munson, Marva says that Othar is some kind of man. Plus, the casino is owned by, get this, Mannix Corporation.
Right.
So
I missed that. That's great. But this
great?
note about Garth's finger being his penis is great, of course, when we think that at the end of the film, the last thing that happens essentially is that Pickles still has the finger and runs and disposes of it. So Garth's penis, so to speak, metaphorical penis, is the last bit of their bodies to be disposed of. And that's what closes the action of the film.
Yes.
Nice. Pickles.
Your point about emasculation has got me thinking about Lump for a second too, and how he's in a way the most manly of them. He's a parody of a man in a sense. He's all strength and brutishness and no mind. And of course, he got that way by pursuing a very manly pursuit, playing football, and presumably having head injuries as a result of football. Or maybe he was, mentally incompetent before and got into football because there was nothing else he could do. But one way or another, it seems to be linked. So that's really interesting.
He's also emasculated. Now that you mentioned, he's also emasculated by Dorr. I mean, Dorr just shreds him.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Dorr says at the end something like, you're a stupid brute and you need to be directed by a higher intelligence.
Yes.
I mean, It is the most incredibly condescending thing, the way he treats him.
Painful, totally painful.
What do you say we move on to? Well, gosh, I thought we were going to have like a 3-minute conversation, and that turned into a long,
crazy
socio-political.
Well, it's good. It's good when we argue. I think it's good.
No, it's great. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, well, we can run
because
quickly.
then the audience can be like, "Oh, I'm on his side. I'm on his side. Or they're both wrong.
Yeah.
Whatever." You know,
they got a horse in the race. So
right. Yeah.
Yeah, some of this we've already sort of jumped forward to, I think, and so maybe we
Yes.
can go through it more quickly because we've brought it up in that context. But
Well, let's do that.
yeah,
Let's move to the philosophical themes if you want to
Yeah. Okay.
lead us into that area, Peter.
Okay. Well, one there are several. There's a lot of philosophical themes, of course, but one I'd first point out is just the old classic argument between the sort of deontological and consequentialist position. I mean, when Goldthwait, is sort of running out of ways of handling Marva after she's discovered, the money. He finally kind of tells the truth, but he says, "Look, where is the victim?" Right? And also, there's an insurance company, a big company, who's not made calculations like this, or maybe I'm just confessing, but like these companies, they're not going to miss whatever this blankety blank. They're going to pay it. They're going to raise their policyholders, premiums by a penny, and big deal. So there's not much consequences. What he's basically saying, and she's kind of taken in by that. She's like, well, just a penny. But then, after looking at Othar, she decides on a deontological position where it's just wrong. It's the wrong thing to do. This is stolen money. I'm not taking any of the stolen money. And so there's that bit there. I think we talked about what it takes to be a man, and I think that's something we've addressed. And I guess I did want to talk a little bit about the comment on chance in life and also the persistence of evil. I think, one way this movie is not, I think, cartoony is that, evil is a real force, and it appears as a shadow. I love in the original, by the way, when Professor Marcus first shows up, he's just outside of the house, kind of menacing the house, and the animals are going nuts, and you just see his shadow. He's the shadow. And here, in this case, there's the candles flicker and the cat, goes wild. But there is a sense that, houses have basements, and there are these dark spaces where dark things happen, and we largely ignore them because sometimes you think, well, is Marva ignorant, or is she consciously trying to ignore this because she wants to? She's flattered by, or she finds Dor interesting. But I like that theme about the ubiquity of chance in life. Like, at the end, of course, you could say there's some kind of, I do think, if you were religiously inclined, you can talk about providence and God's action in the world and good working through evil and all this kind of thing. But it's also the case that, you could read it as just these chance happenings, this gargoyle falls apart and knocks somebody on the head, and the Jesus cuckoo clock. Yeah, that's a cynical commentary there. Right there. It just happens to pop open at these times. So I really think that's something that pervades a lot of their films, and I think it's philosophically interesting. And in a way, so many crime, movies. Well, and there's like the simple plan, for instance. In other words, there's just one. They have a plan figured out, and then just something goes wrong. There's some little factor that goes wrong. It's an old theme in a lot of films, but it does have philosophical resonance, I think, and I appreciate the ubiquity of the darkness and it's the inescapability of it. You could say it's also that you do wonder how much virtue requires knowledge. I think on the one hand, we want to condescend to Marva because she does a lot of things thoughtlessly, but maybe she's like Monica, in Augustine's Confessions. She's just an uneducated but good person, and it may be the case, in fact, that one of the messages they're making here is that you can be too well educated, and that leads to kind of risks that you see in Goldthwait as well. So, at any rate, I've already talked a little bit about the nihilism. I think this film is replete with nihilism if you read it in a certain way. I mean, I want to push the ambiguity that Marva's good, but she ends up doing a bad thing by giving money to, Bob Jones. But it's also the case that, this world seems to be like one where it's really hard for true goodness to take purchase. And I think that's something that they're alive to in a lot of their films, from No Country for Old Men to, Raising Arizona to Hudsucker. is it possible? I mean, a big theme that crosses a lot of their films is philosophically, is it possible for there really to be, have we established conditions in which goodness can really emerge in the world?
Peter, it's really interesting that you say that you find this to be a very nihilistic film.
Troy, I was going to say the exact same thing. I was surprised.
We're both shocked. Our listeners can't see the looks on our faces, but we're shocked. I can't believe it. Gambling in Casablanca. To me, this is one of their by far least, perhaps even their least nihilistic film, and that's part of my issue with it. And again, I like the film, but it keeps it from. I can't engage with it as seriously. Because to me, it seems to be this sort of, cartoon universe where it's sort of guaranteed from the get-go that people are going to get what they deserve and everything's going to work out okay. Meaning, again, that Marva doesn't need to take any action to do anything, that the police don't have to do anything, that all these wrongdoers are going to end up punished basically by their own hands. There are these natural consequences to all their actions because the world is so ordered. And it's such a just world that even if you have 5 men who decide to murder a pretty much helpless and defenseless elderly woman, they will be unable to do so because she's innocent. And so therefore it's just not going to happen, right? One way or another, no matter how ludicrous it might be, something will happen to stop them. The cuckoo clock will spring open at just the right moment, and he'll choke on his own cigarette, right? Whatever it is. And so I feel like, now in some other ways, I think more indirectly, they are acknowledging certain injustices. And we've talked about a lot of those in the previous section about the racial stuff and so on, and the exploitation of the casino, et cetera. So there are injustices going on in a deeper way that a certain reading of the film gets at. But you sort of have to work to get at that stuff. What's on the surface in this film is just a completely just universe. Very similar, I think, to the one that we see in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And in that film, it was clearly presented as a fantasy, and for various reasons, there was enough other stuff, going on in the movie, really good stuff, that it didn't bother me at all. And I think it's a wonderful film. And in this one, I don't know if it's that there's not enough else to balance it, or it's not clear enough that it's a fantasy, even though it is clearly and overtly ridiculous. But it does bother me. I don't really enjoy, because I can't take it seriously, getting into this universe where apparently there is a benevolent God who's running the show, or something or other is making sure everything's going to go okay. And now there are interesting questions that maybe in some way are raised here, like questions of free will and so on. And, could we have free will in a world that was like that? And one of the ways I think this gets played out is, I think I mentioned up front, the question of redemption and so on. So many American films, so many Hollywood films are redemption stories. Here's 2 things I think really are characteristic of the Coen brothers and really make them the filmmakers they are. There's more, but here's 2 I'll mention. First of all, so often their films do include innocent victims, and we feel the plight and we see the damage done to innocent victims, whereas a lot of Hollywood films just ignore that. They don't want to get into that because that makes you feel bad, right? This film, though, has no innocent victims, and so we don't get that level of seriousness. And then the second thing I think that really characterizes them, Hollywood films are so often redemption stories, and I think that the Coens are extremely resistant to redemption stories. I find the Coens to be, I interpret it in part at least as a great pessimism about the very possibility of a person truly changing. I'm not saying they think it never happens, but I think they think it really rarely happens. And they certainly think the universe is not set up for redemption. And even in this film, which I say is, it's a very just universe. It's not nihilistic, I think, in that sense. But redemption, I think, in this universe seems to be impossible because, there's 2 characters at least who take faltering steps towards it. Gawain does in a very limited way. He has an attack sort of conscience, but also, as you mentioned earlier, just sort of a weakness of will or whatever. He can't bring himself to do it. Okay. He can't be the person who does this himself, but he's okay with somebody else doing it. So it's not very redemptive, certainly. But even that little attack of redemption is enough to get him killed right afterwards, basically. And then the same thing happens to Lump later in the film. He has an attack of conscience. He says to Dora, "This is terrible. We're going to kill this innocent person. I'm not going to be part of it. I'm not going to do it." His conscience comes to him in the final moments of the film, but, sort of too little, too late. And again, of course, the consequence is, well, no, this is a just universe. You have to be punished. It's too late now. And he dies. So, and both of them in some sense, Gawain is killed with his own gun. Lump literally shoots himself.
With the allusion back to intolerable cruelty, too.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, again, so we noted there talking about that film, how much of a sort of a hoist by your own petard theme there is in that film. Even more so here, where basically, most of the deaths, I guess Garth and his girlfriend are intentionally killed by the others. He still brings it on himself, essentially, by betraying them, but it's not quite as direct. And Dor is killed by the falling statue, or piece of statue, but of course that's knocked off by the raven, which he takes himself to have an affinity to because of the whole Edgar Allan Poe thing. So it's not as direct in those cases, but it still feels a little bit. But all the rest of all the rest of the deaths feel very directly, this person kills themselves in one way or the other. Yeah, it's poetic, right? It's that ridiculous idea, but so satisfying narratively idea of poetic justice, the general choking on his own cigarette, right, and everything else. They are so ordinarily skeptical of the idea of poetic justice and the world being just in that way. And here they sort of buy into it whole hog. And it's kind of funny because, it's ridiculous. I'm not saying I don't enjoy it. But again, it also makes it sort of a trifling film in a way compared to a film like Fargo, where they explore a lot of similar themes, but they're also willing to say, this is not a world ruled by poetic justice. There are innocent victims and so on.
And if I can, Peter, before you go into your response, I just want to piggyback on that. And that is, the 5 criminals are taken out by their own hand. And as you mentioned, Troy, it could be these natural things. Or could be, it seems the question of divine intervention, of course, has to be considered. And I'm thinking about the Coens using divine intervention throughout their films. Take something like A Serious Man, which we haven't gotten to. There are questions of divine intervention. It's a comedy, but it's much darker. In this film, the question of, what we're calling poetic justice, but seems like from the opening, from the heavens, and then the pastor talking about smoting with God, there is the implication that God had a hand in these guys. He saved Marva, and they got what they deserved. They were sent down to Hades on the boat. The Coens are saying, as I agree with you, they go, as you said, whole hog. The Coens are going, fuck it. Let's just go all in with this. It all turns out fine. And where God has to intervene, it's fine. It's not going to be Larry Gopnik looking at a tornado. It's going to be everything's tidy. And the world is, again, before we hear Petey's response, I agree. I had in my notes, of all the films we've watched so far, this is the most just universe. This is the one. I even said, I don't really see much nihilism in this film at all. So, Petey, over to you for the rebuttal.
I see evil in the film, but I don't see nihilism because the evil always gets punished.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I may have come off a little bit too strongly because my argument, I'm trying to draw a kind of, I think we've almost flipped from the argument we had about intolerable cruelty, except that I want to say there's something congruous here, and that is, what they often do in their films is they'll zing you at the end with something that complicates it. At the end of Raising Arizona, there's the dream, which makes you, is it a dream? Is it, is it serious? At the Hudsucker, argument we had about it could be all just, in the moments of his death, and this is all just fantasy. In Intolerable Cruelty, it looks like, the happy ending, the lovers are going to be together, and then you find out they're going to be, running this awful TV show. And my, read on that was that, they introduced this dark element that I thought, if I understood your argument about that film, was that it totally subverts, just like in Hudsucker 2, totally subverts and inverts everything. It's not a happy ending. It's not, these people don't have a positive future. And similarly here, I agree that I think I said the wages of sin or death, that's the big theme of the film. And there's this kind of justice for those who worship the golden calf, and they end up smote? I guess it's just smote. You end up smote by the end of it, and on the garbage island. But then what they throw in is that little Bob Jones thing there. And I don't think it totally subverts it. I don't think it totally suggests, because as I said, there could be some providential way God's going to use that money, even though it goes to Bob Jones University, to do good, because that's just the kind of shit that those, stories tell. But, it's not great, when you see it, you're like, holy crap, all that money is going to go to these awful miscreants at Bob Jones University. And this woman, as sweet as she is, and with all the moral rectitude she is, she's a fool. Anybody who would, give that much money to, an organization like that and not understand how contrary to the well-being of African Americans they are, this is just an idiot. And so there's a darkness there that they introduce, and that's and not the nihilism. But I'm not saying it's clearly that the whole world is that way. I think it's ambiguity, and I think they love to throw in these little ambiguous bits. Same with Marge, by the way, in Fargo, like all that stuff about it being such a nice day at the end and all that. Like, I agree. I think Marge is a much richer character, and yet, but they love to complicate things and suggest, as at the end of Fargo is another thing, that baby's coming into a world, but we know there's evil in that world, and real serious evil at the end. And I think there's a kind of consistency in their messaging here across this. So anyway, modification.
Yeah, it's a nice observation. I like the bit about Bob Jones University because that had not occurred to me, dude. And that does complicate things a little bit. There is a kind of an acknowledgement that people with good intentions who think of themselves as virtuous and so on can end up doing evil without meaning to. So just because they're ignorant or whatever it is. So that's good. I like that.
But also it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's complicity in your own oppression. Notice that the vehicle through which she is complicit in her own oppression is religion. So the reason why she's giving to Bob Jones University is because it's a good Christian university. And again, I'll reiterate, she's not a member of the black nationalist Muslim. She's a member of the white man's religion, and it's that as a vehicle. So her vice, we could say it's ignorance, as you just alluded to, but it could be religion itself. Religion is the vice, and it's through religion that the vice takes place, as it's a conduit for the money to get to Bob Jones University.
Yeah, she sees through Goldthwaite's lies, but she doesn't see through Bob Jones's lies. She's still kept, or the lies of, of religion. So she's made some epistemic progress in the course of the film, but she's still under the spell of these big lies in a way.
I mean, just as a practical, she didn't get the memo about Bob Jones. Everyone knows Bob Jones University is segregated. What the hell? I mean, this is what I'm saying. The Coen brothers, to me, that's an idea where they're sitting around going, I have an idea. She donates to Bob Jones University. Right. And I would imagine one of the other Coens would go, nah, that's not a good idea. But somehow no one sent them the memo that was it's a little bit heavy-handed, She could have been donating to the KKK or something.
It is, Peter, I agree. It is a heavy-handed film, so that's true. But
there's this candidate, David Duke, who I'm going to contribute to. He's
exactly.
a Christian
It's like
guy.
that.
The freedom and chance stuff and so on, I already talked about that a little. There's a kind of a fatalism almost here. I think it is worth at least mentioning in that connection the mechanism of the drawing of straws, which certainly feels like it introduces an element of very strong chance and which they treat almost religiously, because when Gawain tries to go back on it, they say no, he doesn't call it the mechanism, it's something that becomes meaningless if you don't abide by, like you drew the sword straw, right? You have to do this, otherwise the person can't just bow out and say no, I'd rather not. So they take that very seriously. And yet it does almost feel, too, like it's sort of preordained that, of course, Gawain would be the first one to draw the short straw. And as in so many horror movies and so on, the black guy's the first guy who gets killed. It just feels like, of course, nobody's surprised, including him, I think, when that happens. The African Americans are always drawing the short straws in this society, right? So I think that's a nice little metaphorical moment. There's randomness and yet not randomness in a way.
And also the drawing of the straws is it's a little prelude to the next film where we have a coin toss that's going to determine someone's life, right?
Yes, so, that's great. I've not made that connection. That's wonderful.
I think there's an ambiguity to that you this is maybe a stretch, but I believe that practice started with decimation, the Roman practice of decimation. And so to draw the short straw meant that you were the one who was going to die.
So 1 out of every 10 person was killed, and that's how they decided? That's interesting.
I think so. Wow. And so, like, when they think they're pulling the straw to, like, determine who will kill Marva, but really, they're the ones who will die.
Determining their own deaths, because every person who tries, that's right. Except for Garth, who, of course, doesn't even pull the straw because he just takes it into his own initiative to try to steal the money and thereby brings about his death. And his girlfriend's death also. So that's the closest we get to an innocent victim in this film, but she's still complicit in his, I wanted to mention just a little about epistemology here. We think about point of view and so on. The point of view here seems to be very objective. We're not tied to any of the particular characters. There's times when we seem to see things through Marva Munson's eyes. There's times when we see things through Dora's eyes. And they're really the two main candidates for this. But there is also, of course, the cat. And there's definitely times when the cat functions as an interesting kind of observer. And it's almost, we're watching the cat. I find the cat actually quite interesting on the rewatch, especially in light of some later films like Inside Llewyn Davis, where cats play a big role. You really get the sense sometimes that the cat knows what's going on and the cat is judging them. From the beginning, as I think was already mentioned, when Professor Dorr shows up, the cat hates him and hates him all the way through. And it's the cat, again, who takes it upon himself to dispose of the final digit at the end to make sure that the job is complete, and every bit of these guys has been sent off to Garbage Island. And there are definitely moments where the cat seems to be watching and knowing what's going on, or moves the plot forward, with one action or another. I think that this goes back to something we said quickly earlier, too. There's this idea, I think, in this film that evil is unnatural, that the world of nature hates evil and wants to eject it. It wants to get rid of it. Because, again, this is such a deeply just cosmos that, not only the cat hates these guys, the raven does too, right? It's the raven at the end that finishes off Professor Dorr, even though he wrongly thought it was on his side. He loves Edgar Allan Poe, darkness, blah, blah. The raven hates him. The raven kills him at the end. The whole world of nature is against these guys. I mean, they're overmatched, essentially, because it's a fundamentally just universe, and it's going to set itself aright. And so humans might be fooled the way Marva Munson is fooled repeatedly by these guys throughout the film. But the animals aren't going to be fooled, and eventually they're going to get their due because of that. The other thing I found myself thinking about, I just want to mention this briefly, just sort of the Coens, of course, make a lot of films about criminals and crimes and so on. They're almost never mystery films. Almost all of their films are more concerned with the aftermath of crime. And it's the case in almost all their films about crime that even though there are a lot of characters who don't know what's going on and are in the dark about it, we in the audience know. They almost never use the device. It's almost like they feel it's cheap to sort of withhold something from the audience as a mystery and then reveal it towards the end, right? They don't do that. So in this film, in Fargo, and Blood Simple, and all the Man Who Wasn't There, right? All these films, we watch the things being done, we watch the crimes being committed, we know who did it. And then we follow on all these different characters, some of whom know, some of whom don't. Some of them are trying to figure it out and so on, and many of whom are just sort of, as in this case, trying to cover it up and try to get away with it. It's the aftermath. It's a very sort of Stanley Kubrick kind of thing. A lot of his films sort of work that way too. As you mentioned earlier, something goes wrong. You have to try to take care of it, fix it. It spirals out of control, right? You can't control the aftermath, The only Coen film that I could think of, and maybe you can correct me, the only one I can think of that really has a mystery plot in the classic sense, in that, there's a crime and we don't know who did it, and then the protagonist works on figuring it out and finally does, and we learn who it is and what happened when they do, is The Big Lebowski. That's the only one I could come up with, where the dude actually solves the crime and figures it out, and that's when we find out what had happened. But I don't think there's any other Coen film where that happens. And that, again, I think is something really characteristic of them as a certain kind of filmmaker, that they are so frequently, even though their films are so much about the unknown and mysteries and so on, they have almost always, they adopt the practice of putting the audience in an epistemically privileged position of knowing what's going on, almost a godlike position in a way. And then watching the poor little humans in the film trying to work it out and figure out what's going on and trying to deal with it. But we don't know what's going to happen, but we know what has happened. It's never a mystery to us. And I find that quite interesting about them.
On that theme, Troy, I do think in a way the cat cannot speak, but the cat is a conduit as the eyes of God. So the cat is witnessing all the criminality. The cat's always there. When they're planning, when they're down in the basement, the cat is there. And of course, you're thinking, if only that cat could talk, that cat could go up and tell Marva what the hell's going on. So I do think that the cat, and this theme of knowing and the epistemological basis, I think the cat does represent for, and you mentioned so astutely, what the audience knows versus the way the Coens present these things. The cat is there to say, even if you're in the basement, God knows what you're doing, right? He knows everything you're doing. So I don't think it's an accident that the cat both is in the film in all these places and, as you mentioned, disposes of the last body part, the stand-in for the penis. That's
I think that's right. And I think in addition to being God's representative, the cat is our representative in a way. He stands in for us. And so he finishes that off at the end too, as we would sort of like to, but can't, not actually being in the film.
Well, what do you say we move to our Coen brothers themes?
I guess what I want to talk a little bit more about is the way in which there's a kind of, one of our fan letters too talked about this, about the introduction of, challenging elements or, some, to me, disruptive elements and nihilistic elements. And I talked about the way I think that the Coens love to introduce ambiguity and themes, struggles with nihilism across their films. And I guess I want to talk about something that I think, Troy would share too, is this way that they play on boundaries and being in and out, inside and outside. I mean, from Barton Fink's hotel to the spaces inside and outside the corporation in Hudsucker. But I really thought it was interesting how we had the cellar as a place of, it's unknown to Marva. It's a place where you hear, it's the hidden place. It's the dark place. It's the place beyond light and knowledge. And so is the casino room in a way. It's moved off of the boat. The money comes off of the boat and goes into this kind of burial chamber, this kind of tomb-like. I thought it was interesting that you can't get access to it through the normal. I mean, you can, but there's a steel door. But for some reason, like whoever designed that room would have, of course, in real world, would have thought about this like, but the walls, we'll just leave them as brick. So you come into it through, not through like a normal opening, but a backwards, outside, underground, opening has to be opened to enter, that space. And I think, that's a theme that they have a lot in their films is, these liminal spaces and these marginal spaces and these places where dark things happen but are somehow still connected to. I love how like the underground casino, the money chamber had this, this tunnel that connected it, on the map. I loved how that line went. And I think that plays into a general theme of skepticism. I've talked about it before too, that they rarely give you a space where anybody fully understands what's happening, or and even for the audience. So anyway, that's what I'd like to say, at least to start off with, and hopefully Troy will pick up on that. I thought it was a fascinating theme.
There's something else to notice on the point of the basement, and at one point Dorr says they rehearsed in crypts. He mentions crypts,
right?
Which, ironically, that basement is their crypt. They just don't know. I mean, ultimately the barge is, but this is where they're all going to meet their demise. So,
and there's even a coffin down there.
There's a coffin.
There's even a coffin down there.
Yeah, I really think this the theme of inside and out, of border violations and so on, penetration, is all over this film. Maybe more than any film by them we've seen up to this point, and so many iterations. And we've already talked about some, like the idea of Gawain as the inside man in the casino and the bank job, but at the same time being kind of an outsider in the group and that interesting status. And Garth, of course, later makes himself an outsider by betraying the group and trying to get away with it, which leads to his death. And then, connections to this, especially in Gawain's case, with racial stuff and so on. And then I mentioned up front in the lightning round that this was another enemy within story, like Fargo. Where in Fargo, they have a hard time understanding what has happened in terms of the kidnapping, because they don't realize for a long time that, of course, the quote-unquote mastermind behind it was Jerry Lundegaard, Jean's wife. The threat originated from inside the house, even though he hires people to come in and do it. So there's an inside man there, too. And similarly, we have a bunch of enemies within an inside men here who get into Marva's house and use that as their headquarters, and she has no idea that they're a threat. She has no idea what's going on. From there, they sort of, tunnel
Miller's
into the
Crossing
wall.
too, yeah.
What's that? And Miller's Crossing, right? Yes, we've seen this in a variety of Coen films. In fact, they tunnel into the wall. They tunnel into the bank vault. One of my favorite images. So again, like I said, one of the things I hadn't realized or had forgotten about this film, because I only saw it once when it came out. I thought of it as not very visually interesting, but there's actually some pretty good scenes and images in here. And one of the ones I love is the blank white wall, which to me reminds me a bit of Fargo. It calls back to that. Suddenly, almost immediately penetrated by the drill coming from the other side. And at first, you don't know what you're looking at. You're trying to figure it out. That is a great little shot. Metaphorically resonant, visually, I think, really interesting. They don't hold it for very long, but it really struck me this time. And certainly the whole penetration of the casino vault is obvious border violation, but I think also there's a lot of metaphors stacked on metaphors here. I want to say, first of all, you've got, the metaphor of the casino vault and the root cellar. Also, in a very different way, the church. All of these are sort of spaces that some people won't go into or feel they can't go into. They're, I don't want to say sacred in every sense, but they're all sanctuaries in a way. They're all places where people hide or where they hide things, or where, again, late in the film when she suggests to Dor that they go to church, the idea, there's no way he's ever going to set foot inside a church, right? He knows he's not a person who could safely do that. And so you have this interesting space that in one way is quite central to this film, and yet none of the main characters other than Marva ever even set foot in it. The church occupies a very weird space in the film. I think also the part of what makes me think there's a metaphor here is just the whiteness of the church and the whiteness of the walls of the vault, which Gawain then has to restore after they break into it. He's the one again left behind. So the black guy gets left up behind to restore the veneer of whiteness. I think there's some lovely metaphorical stuff going on there. But I also, and you may think this is a push too far, I'm going to connect it with Garth's IBS. I think the inside-outside stuff, especially in terms of, people getting shot and violence and stuff, which we've often connected it to before. And again, 2 people get shot to death in this film as well. The inside-outside stuff, the skin is one of the most important boundaries. It's about keeping stuff in that you're worried is going to get out, like blood and so on, and keeping stuff out that you're worried is going to get in. So we've got the money in the vault that's supposed to be in the vault and not get out, and these guys are trying to get it out. In the middle of this operation, Garth is struck by an attack of IBS. And what is that? Now he's worried that the stuff he's trying to keep in is going to get out. And so he has to find a restroom, right? So I'm going to say there's a triple metaphor here between the toilet, which of course, nice clean white porcelain, the vault, and I think the church, is also connected to that. The toilet and the vault, sort of obvious in the sense that they're both, again, pristine and white. You do your stuff, then you flush the toilet, you wash away the crap. You restore it to its original pristine white state, which is what Gawain is going to ultimately do with the vault. Also, I'm going to say a metaphor here, so many metaphors, a metaphor here between that flushing disposal of the crap and what happens to the bodies of the criminals throughout the last little bit of the film. They're throwing out the trash, right? We're restoring the world to its original, just pristine state. All of this stuff, how much of it is consciously in the Coen's mind, I don't know. But as I was watching this stuff, I kept feeling like this is all connected. And this IBS condition that he's got, it's low, crude humor, juvenile, whatever. 13-year-olds will find this funny and so on. But it may be more than that. There actually is something interesting, I think, going on, even with that, very little crude bit of characterization that is given to Garth. And it certainly causes a lot of anxiety in Garth, which I think is, there's a fear of exposure that is linked to that, which I think all the criminals suffer from, is clear fear of being exposed to Marva and to the world. And again, of having what they're trying to keep hidden come out and become public. So I think there's a lot of different resonances and levels here happening. And I think they're really playing with these inside out border violation metaphors, that they've used before in other films. And so it's putting the film in the canon and making it belong there, but also doing some really new, interesting things with them.
And Troy, what is Gawain doing the first time we meet him? He's disposing of trash.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Oh, that's beautiful. That's so great. That's sort of his function in life. Yeah. No, that's really good. And in the end, he gets disposed of like trash, like all the rest of them. That's excellent. And of course, Gawain, to some degree, is being treated as if he were trash by society, too. So, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. That tunnel is, there's like a structural parallels, like the casino and its basement, Marva Munson's place and its basement. They're both connected by this tunnel, which has an anus that blows out the wrong way. In a way.
Right. And yeah, in the moment that you sort of mentioned this at one point, in the moment where Garth gets caught in there and he manages to get the timer going again, which had become stuck. He can't quite get out of the tunnel in time. And so this guy who suffers from IBS ends up being blown out of the anus of this tunnel by an explosion. That's I mean, it's so crude. I shouldn't even be laughing at it, but it is funny, and it's pretty fucking clever.
Consciousness. I think that's conscious on their part, yeah.
I mean, he becomes a piece of shit at that point, essentially, is what's happening.
He does.
Which he already is.
A piece of shit, right?
Yeah.
On those 2 points, if I may, just for a moment. Now we're talking Looney Tunes level of comedy, but there's 2 things that involve Garth. One is, of course, when he picks up the hammer and says, like, yeah, you can even hit this with a hammer.
Oh, my God.
And then they pan outside and you hear this explosion.
Can I just say about that really did strike me as funny. Part of it, there's many things that make that so funny. The timing is perfect and so on. And the fact that we don't see it happen, we see it from the outside. But part of what makes that funny, too. Tom Hanks, I think, is great in this film, and he's never better than during that scene. First of all, his face when the explosion happens and his reaction, and trying not to show his reaction. And then a few moments later, he tells the lie, and so on. He says, oh, I'll figure out which utilities connected to this contretemps, as he says. Yes. Great choice of words. But then the way he runs up the stairs, too, is just so
I know,
funny.
right?
Oh, my God. There's a certain moment when he drops his act and he just panics and he's flailing his arms around. It's hilarious.
That is really funny. That made me laugh. And then the other thing is, so I mean, now we're going to like the Roadrunner and the Wile E. Coyote. When he crawls in and the timer was supposed to go off a long time ago. So he crawls in, he picks up, and you see that it's stuck. And you're thinking, so he picks it up and he taps it. Like, what is he thinking? Like, I'm going to get this thing working with 13 seconds. I think it was 13 seconds.
It was 13, yeah.
So those things, I was so Roadrunner. I'm like, oh, shit, what's going to happen. And
you can see it coming.
The way
it's stupid, but it's totally funny.
And the way that what's his name, J.K. Simmons, the way that he's crawling, I don't know if they sped it up, but that is some funny crawling. That is so funny. He's
some
literally
of these guys are
crawling
great
for his
physical
life.
comedians, and they really use it here. So, yeah, that really does help. I'll quickly mention, I think, just one more. I think everything else important has come up, but there is, of course, my Coen gun rule.
I was going to say, Troy, I wanted to bring the Coen gun rule.
Discuss the Coen gun. It's a tradition by this point. Our listeners would be so disappointed if we didn't mention it. And sure enough, there's only a couple guns in this film. There's the guns used by the robbers in the original donut shop scene, which don't ever get fired, and they seem pretty incompetent, and so on. But those aren't main characters, so it's hard to conclude a lot about that. There, of course, is Gwane's gun later on, which, does that tell us something about his character? Yeah, he can't shoot it. He can't bring himself to actually shoot it. And it's interesting because earlier on, when the idea of killing Marva first sort of came up and was being discussed by the group, Professor Dorr talked about how hard it would be and how, you don't realize, he said, how hard it is to actually do such a thing, to pull the trigger or plunging the knife. And it turns out, sure enough, that for Gwaine, it is really hard. He can't bring himself to do it. He goes back down into the cellar and says, I'm out. Somebody else is going to have to do this. That's when Garth starts yelling at him, saying, be a man, etc. They get into their little struggle. And then it's actually Garth who physically attacks him. Gwaine says something about his girlfriend, the 60-year-old with pigtails, as she calls her, which enrages him. They fight a little bit, and Gwaine gets shot, of course, shot with his own gun, presumably inadvertently, though it's really hard to tell. It might be that Garth actually shot him intentionally. We don't really know, but he gets shot with his own gun, so another hoist by your own petard sort of thing. And then, of course, the other thing with the gun, which I think we've already mentioned, is Lump at the end. There's actually, he gets handed the gun by Professor Dorr, and here again, I think Tom Hanks is great. He's holding the gun like it's a rotting fish or something, like he doesn't even want to touch it. And this really exemplifies something I don't know that we've mentioned yet about Dorr, but he really has sort of kept his hands clean in a lot of ways through this. He's let the other guys do all the dirty work. He didn't go into the vault when they all did. They're the ones who are sort of carrying out the plan, right? He's the brains behind it. And he calls Lump the brawn or whatever, that has to be directed by higher intelligence. But they're all sort of that way. He treats them all kind of that way. And there's even a moment, I think it's after the tunnel has failed to collapse, that he says, well, of course the tunnel has to collapse. That's part of our plan. Need I remind you that, if the tunnel if they discover it sort of, and, the homeowner has all of your names. He doesn't say all of our names. So leading me to think he's probably used a fake name, and, Professor Door or whatever isn't even really his name. He doesn't include himself in that group. He's separate from the group. He sees himself as higher in this way, and he sees himself as, even though he's directing the criminal enterprise, he's not going to get his hands dirty. And I think that comes out in the way that he handles this gun when he hands it to Lump at the end. And of course, it's interesting that at that point, he and Lump are the only two left. He doesn't say, let's draw straws to see which of us is going to shoot her. It's just a given in his mind. Lump will do it. He just takes it for granted. And it doesn't occur to Lump to say to him, no, let's draw straws. But Lump takes a different objection. I'm not going to do this at all. We shouldn't do it. I'm not even going to let you do it. And that's the moment we mentioned earlier where, step towards redemption, conscience showing itself. But then Lump is so incompetent that, much as in Intolerable Cruelty, again, he shoots himself without meaning to. So I think that moment with the gun tells us a lot about Lump's character. But I think it also, the way that Door handles the gun tells us a lot about him as well.
I did want to say one thing, Troy, you mentioned. I thought it was interesting when Door, he's talking about why the bomb has to go off to close the tunnel. But one of the reasons he gives is aesthetic. He's like, aesthetically... Yes. The crime it's a much more elegant crime.
That's right. It's more intellectually satisfying.
Yes, right? Intellectually.
I love that. Yes.
I wanted to mention just a few, if I could, Coen themes. One is the erudite central character who uses ridiculous language that is, no one is so eloquent, and we get that, of course, and this is a common. We get it particularly in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou with the George Clooney character. They love having characters use language that it's basically like the SAT level, the vocabulary. And also, we mentioned earlier, I think before we recorded, this thing with, the Big Lebowski, they go get pancakes. Here they have to go to the Waffle House. I know something about the Coens and
and in Fargo, they also go to Pancake's house. So it's definitely a running theme.
The other thing is, I was thinking about the portrayal of university professors in film, and I think that Door is this kind of trope. Like whenever we see in TV and film that these professors they're very erudite and they speak in this way, and they're sort of detached. They're academic. They're in a different world. I was thinking, and we haven't talked about A Serious Man, but I think Larry Gopnik. Now, there's a character who is like a professor. He's a regular guy in a lot of ways. He has all these earthly desires. He's neurotic. So I think it was interesting to compare that portrayal of a university professor. I think in this one, of course, the Coens are going, let's just put the stereotypical, and we don't even know if he's a professor, so he could be acting like a professor, but that's part of it. We mentioned earlier the walling in of that he does in the casino when Gwaine does it. I was thinking about, and of course, all the allusions to Poe, and as Peter, as you mentioned, the reference to immuring, and I was thinking of the cask of Amontillado. They're drinking wine while he's putting the bricks in, right? So there's that allusion.
Exactly.
Nice. It's pretty literal.
That wall again is, it relates us to the Daniel story, because what happens is in the story is the king Nebuchadnezzar is raising a toast in some golden goblets or whatever. Is not supposed to. They're sacred. They shouldn't be used for secular purposes. And this finger appears magically and writes on the wall a prophecy about his death. But he's unable to read it. He doesn't know what it means, and he needs Daniel to interpret it for him. But it's the toast that marks the moment of
very good
transgression.
Yeah. Of course, tying back to Marva, as you mentioned, Peter. Marva is the first time we hear her. She's mentioning the writing on the wall, but she's using some terms that I had to look up.
Yeah, right.
Troy, the last thing, as the poet laureate of the program, I think the poem he's reciting, it's a Poe poem about Helen of Troy, or Helen. After I watched it, I went and read the poem. I was really moved by it. And I was wondering, as as our poet. How does that poem, does it fit into the canon of great American poems?
I'm not sure exactly how Poe is regarded these days. And I think he's kind of an interesting case where I think to some people he feels a little too popular almost. He's like not a serious poet. He's not Longfellow, but he's sort of towards Longfellow, a little sing-songy or whatever. And yet my sense, my very uninformed sense, not really having talked to anyone about this, is that it would be easier now to find more people who would say, well, no, actually, he was really good. Like, yeah, he was popular, but that's not necessarily a crime. Like, I think personally, some of his stuff, yeah, The Raven is fun, and yeah, it's a little sing-songy, whatever, but it's also a pretty cool poem, and a lot of the effects that he gets, I think, are actually quite good. So I would think he's at least somewhat respected, and some people regard him as, really a truly great American writer and really important part of our literature, and I think that's probably a fair assessment. That is a really wonderful poem, and that's also a really great scene. And I love how Professor Dorr in that scene, I love a couple things about it. One is how he just wins over this entire room full of women and becomes, for a moment, probably the only moment in the film, kind of a sex object. They're all like, oh man, this guy, he knows poetry, like whether he's a real professor or not. And I agree with you. That's a matter of some doubt. He can pull it out when he needs it, and he can really use it to his advantage. The same as not long after when he's giving the one single penny argument to Marva, and now he's using his rhetorical and logical skills, and he's got them. He can persuade people. But then the other thing I really love about that scene is that, and maybe we should save this for the music section, but I'll mention, there's a lovely little piano piece under it that I assume is Carter Burwell. And it reminded me very much of the scene in Intolerable Cruelty when George Clooney gives his speech in Las Vegas, where again, it's accompanied by this very, very, what seems to be completely sincere, beautiful music. And in both cases, you have somebody who, and it made me think of Intolerable Cruelty, how they quoted poetry at each other and sort of used it almost as a weapon. They used it in court, the use of Simon and Garfunkel again, right, and all that. The Coens are doing this interesting thing in these movies in particular, where you have these characters who do have sort of a veneer of culture and sophistication. And they're using cultural artifacts of genuine beauty and genuine appeal. And it feels sort of real. And I'm sort of touched by it. Like, he recites that poem and it sort of gets to me a little, and the music is good. And yet, it's all manipulation. You're conscious the whole time, even though it's getting to you, even though you're having a bit of an aesthetic of reaction and response and so on. You also know that it's mere manipulation, or you also know in George Clooney's case that he doesn't really mean it, and he's just going to slide back into his former life, and it's all sort of bullshit. But it sure sounds good, and he delivers that speech like he really means it for the most part, till he gets to the end, right? I think these are very interesting moments in these films. I think there's something quite interesting and provocative going on there.
There was a racialized moment with that where, tell me if you picked up on this. Marva says something like, what is that? Some whore of Babylon. And I think it genuinely offended him. And so he gets back at her by, saying like, one does not know who Helen was, but when I imagine her as pale, which yes. I thought like, whoa,
yeah,
talking to the black woman here. And I thought, that was a cut. That was a rejoinder to her insulting Helen and with her whore of Babylon remark. And I thought, wow, that shows his little mean streak, doesn't it? Wow.
Agreed. To use the word pale in that context, yeah, that was really something.
And the way that they, as you mentioned, the way that he says it, pale. He
says it so. It's unguent. It's like an unguent.
Yes, unguent. Why don't we move over, since we're in the music? Peter, what do you any observations, any thoughts on the music of the film?
These are not exactly about the content of the music. I mean, we did mention about I Left My Wallet in El Segundo. I listened to that. I was unimpressed. I was like, why did they even pick this? Well, it's because it was so repetitive and shallow, and it is about money.
Look, it's very repetitive, but I'm just telling you, I think it's a great song. I mean, Ravel's Bolero is repetitive, and it's a great song.
True. I mean, it's true. But I caught the little allusion to Bob Dylan. Did you catch that?
The Jew with the guitar.
The Jew with the guitar comes by.
That's what I wrote down, Bob Dylan.
And I thought that the choir master looked a little bit like Little Richard and Prince
Totally.
had a baby.
Totally.
I thought that was interesting, connection there. And of course, the contrast between gospel and hip hop. And you did the problematizing there, Robert, that I had thought about too. Like on the one hand, Marva's all high and mighty about her like criticism of hippity hop stuff, but like, a critique can be made about gospel too. I mean, I would not, say that Christianity is a white man's religion. I think it's, black Christianity is authentic, but it's a question to be raised, and it does you wonder, like, maybe you're being a little bit high-handed here, Marva, with your criticism of young people's music.
I mean, obviously, this is another Coen film like "O Brother, Where Art Thou," where they're showing a kind of interest in American music and American music that's somewhat off of the commercial mainstream anyway. And I definitely appreciate that about them. The music isn't really integrated into the film as much as it is in "O Brother," and it sort of sometimes just feels like, well, we're going out to take a little musical break and hear this cool music, But the music is pretty good. It's nice to hear it. The performance is incredibly energetic, as gospel music often is.
There's two rousing performances. The one that when we first go to the church and then at the end of the film, both of those are, and those I read,
they're great.
Those are all legit gospel choirs.
Yes. And on the DVD, I think they have the full performances of those songs too, which is really nice because, they're really good. So I didn't mind at all. That's not a complaint in terms of, I'm glad the music was there. I almost would like to hear more of it. One of the things I really appreciate about Inside Llewyn Davis coming up later on is that when they played a song, they played the whole song. And I really like that. I kind of wish they'd done that here. But, the church is integrated into the story enough. It makes sense. There's also some, I think, really good, not a lot, but some really good incidental music by Carter Burwell. I mentioned that piano piece in particular, which is really nice. There's a couple more active themes as well that I think are good. There's a very interesting sort of mashup that happens, right? There's a sort of a sequence. It's like a montage. And again, there's I think they show the church somewhat. It starts with them tunneling. It's the first time you sort of see them really building the tunnel. And it starts with this sort of like almost Renaissance-y music that they're allegedly playing. Oh, and how interesting is it, by the way, to interject something here, that the criminals here are pretending to be musicians. Like, I feel like by the Coens, this is a little comment on the culture industry, on Hollywood or whatever, right? You've got these people, these evil men who care only about money, who are pretending to be musicians and care about music and care about things of beauty. Nice. I think that's a nice little comment that is never made explicit, but it's part of, what's happening in this film. So we see this little sequence where they're beginning to tunnel, and at first the music is like Renaissance-y type stuff, sort of the kind they would play. Then it turns into more like work music. It's something like accompanying the digging, and almost sounds like out of Bridge Over the River Kwai or something like that. And then you see them going to dispose of the dirt they're digging out and throwing the bags off the bridge, and then it transitions into a hip-hop song or something like that. It just moves through these different genres in this really weird way, and then goes to gospel, right? You're seeing like all these different, or hearing, you're seeing the action, you're hearing all these different genres of music. And there's a kind of continuity. Each one sort of flows into the next, and yet they're also very different from each other. That really struck me this time. I didn't remember it from having watched the film before, but I thought that musical bit was really well put together, and then really well put together with the images to really tell a story, that said a lot in a very interesting way. I don't know how much Carter Burwell was involved in putting that together. I would assume it was mostly him.
I think it was T-Bone Burnett.
Was it him? Yeah. Okay. So
he's
he's a genius. But so is Carter Burwell. They're both great. So anyway, I thought that was very effective, and that really struck me watching it this time.
I wondered if the Coens weren't thinking that they could do with this film, with the music, what they did with "O Brother, Where Art Thou," if there was going to be a renaissance of gospel music sweeping the country, but that just didn't happen.
It did seem kind of like a missed opportunity, didn't it? Because, clearly this is, I don't know where that town actually is, but it seemed to me, given the proximity of Memphis when they send her up there to a concert, that it's probably Mississippi Delta area. And there's just such a great, rich musical, history there that it seems like they could have pulled on that more. I don't know.
Yeah,
it would have been nice to see a few other acts. So the ones that are actually in it that we see and hear in performing the gospel music are the Abbott Kinney Lighthouse Choir with Rose Stone and the Venice Four.
Yeah, they're just incredible, really incredible, really moving. I just wanted to mention just one comment. You guys covered a lot of this stuff about the music. Of course, because he's into antiquity, he can't just have a string quartet. It has to be, and this is reference back to the 55, but it has to be Renaissance to the Rococo, and they have to use period instruments like the sackbut, which
That's
I think the word sackbut. I don't think that it's a coincidence, given the IBS and the whole scatological nature of the comedy of the humor.
No, and in fact, at one point later on, Lump confesses, right, Professor, I don't actually know how to play the butt sack.
Yeah, the butt sack, exactly. But and the other thing, and this is true of both the 55 and the remake, and that is what's interesting is the music that they're playing. Like in the 55, they put on the LP, of course. In this updated version, they use the blaster, the boombox, which of course is appropriating from black culture, especially if you think about, make a reference to Do the Right Thing, right? How Radio Raheem carries that thing. So, but what's interesting from both films is the music they're playing doesn't accord with the instruments they have. So what you're hearing is string music, and they have brass, and they have this. So
that's right.
It's like it's just weird that they wouldn't even have those the correct instruments, given his level of expertise, supposed expertise.
Well, we have to wonder how much of an expert he really is. He casts himself as one, but he may be faking it, and he either has no idea or just doesn't really care. Thinks, well, nobody's going to be paying that much attention. So, and of course, it never seems to occur to him that somebody, they've said they're musicians, somebody might actually ask them to perform at some point. I mean, it's a pretty, that's a bad cover story, right? Like you can come up with something better than that. If you don't know how to play instruments, that is not going to work out.
Well, they are asked in both films, the 55 and the remake, are asked to perform for the ladies who come for tea. And of course, there's always a reason to get out of it.
Right.
One difference that to me marks like a racial, consciousness is in the original, Wilberforce, she knows music pretty well. She starts telling a story about, remember, the quartet.
Her 21st birthday.
Yeah, that's right. And but here, this music is clear, I think, coded as white, and it's not something that Marva likes, but she's not all that familiar with.
Why don't we head to wrap things up with our cinematic plot character observations? One thing I wanted to say was, and I should have mentioned this during the Coen's themes, but this is their first remake, but it's not their last remake. It's interesting that they go on to do True Grit, and I think those are their only two remakes. I mean, direct remakes. A lot of borrowing from Preston Sturges throughout the films, and there's Preston.
They borrow
Sturges
from tons of people. Yeah. But the Coens have actually said about True Grit they don't consider it a remake because they didn't think the first version of True Grit was a good adaptation of the novel.
Okay.
And so what they claimed in interviews was it was an adaptation from a novel rather than a remake of the other film. So maybe a fine distinction, I don't know, but they said it. So
fair enough. Well, then this is their only remake so far.
Their only remake, yeah.
Here's what I was going to just mention some observations. I mentioned earlier, alluded to the opening. I think the opening is, the camera angles are just wonderful, how it starts, pointing to the heavens, and then it turns, and then you have this tormented face of the earthbound gargoyle, right? And of course, including Poe's raven, foreshadowing, of course, the end of the film. And then we go down to the barge, and then down to the depths of Hades. So I think that was interesting. Another thing, which is, I guess, a Coen theme, but also a cinematic theme, is, so we had a camera put inside of a bowling ball. Now we have a camera put inside of a football helmet, which is another very interesting perspective. I was like, what the hell are they doing? But I'm like, oh yeah, the Coens, they're going to do that.
And can I say how much in that sequence I particularly enjoyed seeing his little feet come up every time he would
Yes.
get... That was what really struck me as funny during that.
Yes, that was funny. There was another reference to A Clockwork Orange where when the general, when he's about to commit the murder, and then he swallows the cigarette and he grabs the glass to drink the water, and there's the teeth in it. And that, if you remember in Clockwork Orange, one of the social worker comes over to take care of Alex, look in on him, and he drinks the water, and the mother's teeth are in the glass.
Nice.
That's about all I had.
I had two that I wanted to bring up. One was Arsenic and Old Lace, and the other was Driving Miss Daisy. And just, as kind of contrasting in films. You're hearing my cat's bell. I apologize. It's my
Pickles.
It's Pickles. There he is. Oh my God. He's got a finger in his mouth.
Gosh.
Something just crossed my mind, which is if the finger is a metaphor for the penis, and the penis ends up in a pussy.
Oh my God, I never thought of that. A pussy with teeth, a vagina dentata.
Oh my goodness.
There you go. I mean, I wouldn't put it past the Coens to intend that on some level, that they're naughty boys.
Anyway, so let's go back to Arsenic and Old Lace and your Driving Miss Daisy.
Arsenic and Old Lace, 1944, I believe, but it has this this theme of old women and basements that contain dark things and old women who are more than they appear to be. And I mean, I think there's this larger theme again of the strength of older women who are underestimated by those around them, and that was certainly the case in that film. And then Driving Miss Daisy, I mean, is like a negative contrast. I mean, so we have this racialized relationship between Miss Daisy and her driver, and it ends up being a kind of old person's Bildungsroman, that she's going to develop and learn racial things, whereas
through the magical Negro.
The magical Negro, is this facilitating healing kind of thing. Here, I think we have much more, a different kind of older woman who's got her feet on the ground, doesn't need, she does need a kind of education, though, doesn't she? But she's not going to get it from the white men, in that room, except in a negative space. And so, and both of them also play off of, Southern stereotypes about, the interaction between older people. Women and people of different colors. So those are the two that came to me. And in fact, when I thought about Driving Miss Daisy, it made me like Marva all the more. And I think the connection with Marva Munson in Intolerable Cruelty, the judge, by the way, also strengthens this idea that this is a woman of strong moral conviction and judgment. And she comes off as a lot stronger woman than Daisy, certainly. But she also comes off as a woman who's underestimated in the way that the Arsenic and Old Lace women are. So those are two that popped into my head. Maybe not great, but yeah.
She's very sturdy and she's very stout. And she's
very sturdy.
And she, despite her obvious physical difficulties, it doesn't seem to slow her down. Even her piles.
The police underestimate her, at their, not peril, but they, she's, of course, Galway underestimates her.
Mm-hmm.
Until I saw this film, I didn't know what piles were. I had to look that up.
I know, right? I forgot about
nobody
that.
calls them that anymore. That's definitely an archaic usage, but they still exist. Like IBS, they still afflict many people.
They are. It's a real thing.
Well, Troy, what do you have in closing for character cinematic observations?
I have to mention one more line. I've quoted many of my favorite lines already, but there's so many that strike me as funny. I love it when, I believe, again, it's the scene after the explosion where Garth blows his finger off. And Professor Dorr is outside, and he says to Marva and her friend, "I shall see to the matter as only a highly educated classicist could." All of his pomposity is just in that line. It's so like, is that really the person you would want to have around if there was an explosion? I think that's so good. I noticed a number of things that reminded me of other Coen Brothers films, and a couple we've already mentioned, including The Cat and Inside Llewyn Davis and so on. You mentioned the opening shot, the opening sequence. The very opening shot is just in the sky with the clouds, sort of looking into the heavens, which now I didn't have a chance to go back and rewatch it, but it seems to me that's very similar to the final shot of Hail Caesar. I seem to remember the camera panning up into the sky and maybe looking at the sun or sort of getting lost, because again, it's going into heaven, essentially. Hail Caesar is another movie about religion in some strange way. And so that really reminded me of that. There's a clear callback to the Hudsucker Proxy when Professor Dorr is hanging off of the bridge at the end and the seam of his clothing starts to rip slowly. It's just exactly like what happened to Musburger when he was hanging out of the window in the Hudsucker Proxy.
Good thing Husberger had those double stitches.
The double stitch. That's right. I give him the double stitch. He's a nice man. Yes. So unfortunately, I guess Professor Dorr didn't have the double stitch, but he may have been dead by that point anyway.
I think
don't
he was
know.
already dead.
I would expect. So that thing hit him pretty hard. When we were talking about the tunnels and stuff, I didn't mention that the visuals of the tunnels made me think of two other films from the past, Barton Fink with the going into the walls and the tunnels that seem to be going into his mind at a certain point.
Definitely.
That really, and that really spoke to that sort of feeling of this as being in the subconscious again or something like that.
Yeah, the drains.
The drains, yes, it goes down the drain and into those pipes and tunnels. That's right. And then also going forward to A Serious Man, that early shot of the interior of Danny Gopnik's ear canal, yes, which sort of opens it. Amazing shot.
Yeah.
Definitely made me think of this. All these sort of feel like you're going into somebody's mind or somebody's consciousness in a way. So
Good
this
catch.
It's another one of those Coen motifs that they sort of keep using, that look, we're getting inside. It's the hidden stuff that's buried underneath, which I think we connected the Barton Fink pipes to the vision of the underside of the sink that Visser has at the very end of Blood Simple as he's lying there dying. So they keep coming back to the same sorts of images. And I think it's one of the brilliant things about them. They don't forget. And one more, another connection to Hail Caesar. There's the great moment in that when Ralph Fiennes is trying to get, I forget his name, the cowboy actor, to say, would that it were so simple. And there's a moment here where Professor Dorr, when Gawain says, oh, it would be simple to take care of our problem, we just kill the old lady. And Professor Dorr says to him, would that it were simple. And that really struck, because it's such an odd phrasing, it's such an odd way of saying, but it is very Professor Dorr way of saying it. And then it even made me think, there's some character similarities in a way between him and the Ralph Fiennes director in Hail Caesar. So those things struck me as Coen Brothers connections. There's also a moment I wanted to draw attention to that felt to me like a little meta joke, a little, elbow in the ribs kind of thing. When, again, it's during his speech, Dorr's speech, after they appear to have succeeded with the heist. And they're raising their glasses. He's making his little triumphant speech, which just, again, like a magpie, draws from all over the place. And a little bit of it draws from the St. Crispin's Day speech in Shakespeare's Henry V. He says, we happy few, which is part of that speech. And of course, if you know that speech, if you recall it, the next words after we happy few are we band of brothers, which of course, Band of Brothers was, the miniseries that played on HBO like 2 years before that, starring Tom Hanks. So I felt like, okay, that's a little,
nice.
To have Tom Hanks say that
nice.
line at that point. Yeah,
Nice.
That's, they expected us to catch that and recognize that. I
Good catch.
thought that was pretty nice. And then the last things I want to mention are just completely outside the film itself, but facts about the film. Despite this being regarded by many as one of their weakest films, it did win a prize at Cannes. Irma P. Hall won the jury prize for her performance at Cannes in 2004. And it's a little surprised me. And then also this was, and you may have noticed this if you were watching the credits, up to this point, Joel Coen had always been listed as the director of their films and Ethan Coen as producer and so on. This was the first film where they were both listed as the director. It says directed by Joel and Ethan Coen. And the reason for that, or part of the reason anyway, I listened to another podcast where they commented on that and they made it sound as if it was like the Coen's decision. My understanding is that it wasn't. They would have done that all along. It's guild rules, right? Or Academy of Motion Picture rules. Or somebody has the rule about directors. It says only in extraordinary cases can you identify more than one director. It has to be a known team who have worked together for a certain period of time, or I forget exactly how it's specified, or if it just says like a lengthy period of time. But it basically has to be an established unit that has put out several films, as a directing team. And then at that point, somebody decides, okay, you can say, you can list both of your names, just like they have rules about who gets screenwriting credit and all that stuff. They've got this rule. And so ironically, in a way, given that this is, regarded as one of their least powerful or effective films, this is the point at which apparently somebody said, okay, you guys have been together long enough. You've done enough films together. It's clear that you're both directing and so on. You get to list both of your names. But of course, from then on, every film by them, up to Buster Scruggs, is identified as being directed by Joel and Ethan Coen.
Nice piece of
Wow.
trivia.
Didn't know that.
Well, before we end, I wanted to just mention some of the performances. Of course, as you mentioned, Troy, Irma P. Hall, she won, as you said, at Cannes, so that was amazing. But I do think that Tom Hanks gives an amazing performance. He's really strong.
Agreed.
I mean,
He's so good.
he
I
embodies
agree.
all of the tropes of the Southern gentleman from film history. He somehow wrapped them all up, and he didn't miss a beat. He was pretty amazing. Also, I do think that Marlon Wayans, whether or not you like what he is just, I knew he was a funny guy, but he has some acting chops. Let me say, this really comes through. And of course,
And he's got scenes where he has to get angry too, and has to show
Yeah.
emotions, and he pulls it off. I think
totally-
he's really good.
and then I also want to just lastly mention J.K. Simmons. He another standout performance. He really is that kind of military, and the language is kind of that like machine gun. Yes, of course. And I like the way
Easiest thing in the world.
Easiest
everything.
thing in the- what a great line.
Even when he loses his finger, it's kind of like remember the Monty Python, like it's only a flesh wound.
Yes.
It's like it's no biggie, no biggie, no problem.
There'll be a few things I can't do.
Anyway, standout.
J.K. Simmons is
performance.
always excellent. I've never seen him give a bad performance. He's so great.
I have a quick question for you about that sort of thing. Why Gawain? Why is it called Gawain?
It's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question.
I just couldn't tease it out. Like, what's the analogy with the Green Knight? Is there something here? Except maybe that it's another use of a pretentious term. I don't know.
I have no theory about that. I'll have to give it some thought. I mean, it certainly has that sort of Middle English sound and is associated with Gawain and the Green Knight, but I don't know the story of that well enough for one thing to know if there's any sort of connection. I have no idea.
And also, is the name Maxam? Is that a common Scottish name or something? Or
No.
Peter, you and I were fans of, or are fans of the Sons of Anarchy. We didn't mention that
Ryan
Lump
Hurst.
is Ryan Hurst, who
Yep.
was Opie. I don't know, Troy, were you a fan of?
I still have not watched Sons of
anyway.
Anarchy. I just know that because I looked him up. Yeah, but I haven't seen that show
Opie,
yet.
who was a central grounding character in that series. That was Opie. I had no idea. I looked him up. I thought that's Opie, but anyway, he did a great job. I mean, he didn't have to do that much, but
He was funny though, I gotta say. It's not a rounded out character by any means, complete caricature, but I think he sold the funny lines. So
unless you have something further we should discuss, I think it's time to wrap up this edition of No Podcast for Old Men. I guess our next, can I say, these issues of like good films and bad films and their worst films for the Coens, can I authoritatively say we're out of the woods now, and every film
I think so.
from now on is, if not a masterpiece, a great piece of filmmaking?
everyone is at least a contender for the masterpiece status, I would say. Yes, we've gone through the dark wood, the difficult thicket, and now it's all gravy from here on in.
Yeah, we should open talking about that because why did they do that? What happened to them?
We're out of the woods. we're like John Turturro in Miller's Crow. Yeah, we're like John Turturro. We're
That's
out of the
right.
woods.
Look into your heart. Look into your heart.
Look into your heart. Stop making films like this, fellas. Please. Hey, well, look. The next film that we're doing is arguably, it's definitely a contender for their greatest film and a contender for one of the greatest films in a generation.
In the universe.
In the universe.
It's so good. I'm excited. Looking forward to
We'll
it.
let our listeners look up what that is. So we'll be back with that.
Our listeners already know what it is.
They already know.
They're a smart
They
bunch.
know.
Anyway, guys, all right, thanks for another great session. Thank you for our listeners for hanging in with us. I know these are long podcasts, but if you're a Coen fan, hopefully you're sticking with us. So thanks again, and we'll see you at our next podcast.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Bye.